Chapter 15. The Goblin's Revenge. Chapter text. They all tried, in their own way, to keep Harry engaged as Lily whipped up dinner far faster than any muggle could. The good of magic, Harry absently thought, as she got the best results by letting him help in the kitchen and watch. Seeing his mother doing such a mundane task helped clear his mind in some way, but the pit of unease never really left. He couldn't put a name on this sudden collapse of attention on his part. The dark sorrow of this journey shouldn't have felt any more harrowing than any other bit of news he'd been remembering, but his mind wasn't having it. He could not shake off the growing unease in him. This didn't stop him from savoring his dinner with gusto or diving with determination into their chats about anything and nothing. It helped, but never really got to the level of ease he could allow himself to relax. Remus had to tug hard to get the book pulled out of the couch cushions where James had shoved it. Harry immediately wanted to chuck it into the fireplace all over again. He slumped into his seat, feeling as exhausted as if he'd had no break from any of this for a lifetime already, but still managed the slightest of comfort as his parents again sat down on either side of him. No matter what he couldn't wrench free from his mind, he'd never ignore that miracle. James beamed at Harry, telling him with every confidence that was the best the man would want. Harry didn't seem as convinced. Surely Moody would have much preferred a proper burial instead of a trinket of his, but who knew what the ministry had done with his body? Harry got the feeling this was as good as he could ever give. "You didn't think Ron and Hermione would like to come?" Lily asked in surprise. "I needed a moment alone. This seemed like a good time," Harry said softly. "I told them I did it later when Hermione asked what I'd done with it, and they both just went quiet for a moment, didn't seem upset though. Did you have that in your pocket this whole time?" Sirius couldn't help but ask. Harry ignored him. "I've never been so sure of anything," Remus agreed. "So, off to a farm." Lily chuckled. "Don't be ridiculous, Lils," James smirked. "Any market would do to buy the ingredients. Hermione did say she had a bunch of muggle money on hand for this trip." Harry quickly reminded, "We don't want to be seen doing that." "By muggles?" James asked in surprise. "Any one of you could have easily disguised yourselves even if that was the fear." "Okay, maybe not Ron. I don't think he's ever even gone with his mother to do that kind of shopping," he finished with a chuckle. Harry grumbled to himself about being cautious, but could think of no other comeback. Harry sunk low in his seat with shame, while his family looked at each other with worry. "Your magic can waver with your confidence," Remus began with worry, but James quickly countered. "He should be more fueled than ever, though. So they don't have an immediate plan of where to go to next. He still has this one. And he's been acting even more doom and gloom since he got it," Sirius sighed. "There's just no pleasing some people." He tried for a smirk at Harry, who barely returned it. Lily's thoughts began to wander with confusion and concern. They thought nothing of Harry keeping the locket on his person, because he had no reason to grow emotionally dependent on it. But what if it did have other magic embedded in it? Had they glossed over too quickly the dangers this could lead to? Just because Voldemort had intended it as nothing more than a Horcrux didn't mean he hadn't set some other enchantments in it for anyone who handled it. They hadn't seen Umbridge acting any differently wearing it, though, certainly not this almost depressive state her son constantly seemed in. So was she looking for a problem that only existed in his mind for the task ahead? James had a very curious look on his face, as well as he eyed his son, offering, "Do you think it's worse now because you have two souls on you?" Harry gaped for a moment, his mind feeling like it had been kicked. He was so thrown off before he realized what his dad had said, and he nodded slowly that seemed reasonable. Sirius went white in shock at a new idea that occurred to him, but he managed to say it while only stuttering once. "Well then, I don't know why you didn't leave it behind. If the Dementors K-kissed it, problem solved. Would it really be, though?" Remus had that curious, introspective look they hadn't seen in quite some time now, that he was being faced with a new beast's challenge. "The question lies in the magic that we haven't had a chance to study. But Hermione said so long as its receptacle stays intact, so too will the Horcrux. Even if a Dementor decided to do this, and that's a strange if in itself about their recognition of finding part of a soul worthy, wouldn't the soul be able to simply appear right back in the Horcrux?" Harry watched him feeling particularly flummoxed. Not for the first time, he wondered what it would have been like to bring Professor Lupin along on this journey, and this exact conversation would have likely happened, but more than that, the idea had never occurred to any of them. Harry finally told them as such, and Lily kept going before any more disturbing questions could be brought up. Priorities, Remus rolled his eyes. I don't think Ron's ever had to go without food, Sirius noticed with a shrug, thinking Harry's problem was more important, but this hadn't passed his notice either. Neither have we. Honestly, I can't imagine it makes things better. Yesterday he wasn't wearing that Horcrux, Lily noted aloud. You really think that's it? James asked in surprise. Harry's not. I know he's not emotionally attached to it, she quickly agreed. Nor in the same sort of danger even Ginny was, but it's the only thing I can think of for the way he's been since they got it. How have I been? Harry tried to ask evasively, but even to himself it sounded lackluster and filled with his own ever-growing worries. He wasn't even wearing it, but just the memory of it pressing in on him was causing him to feel like he was carrying around the whole of Hogwarts on his back. Lily tisked as she eyed him, like she was hoping he was joking. Then she realized he was just trying to brush this off and swatted him before urging Remus on. Sirius frowned in particular for that reminder, even understanding why now didn't make it feel any better for him or anyone. But then the expression deepened with confusion. Neville had been in the same compartment, and as they'd sadly later learned, lived through something almost similar to Harry. He wouldn't wish Neville had succumbed as well, but why didn't he suffer similar to Harry? Had the boy possibly not been present when, well? He let his mind trail off with a painful wince, almost happy to not bring this up and never get an answer. Some bloody sympathy for Harry's magic, more than his stomach wouldn't kill him, James scowled. Harry couldn't help but agree, a kindling of annoyance for his best friend much higher than it had been in a very long time. Because this is really how I want to spend my night, Sirius groaned at this petty argument. It really was unlike these two, and starting to freak him out a bit. It's encouraging she's thinking the same as you, dear, James told his wife, jiggling his knee uneasily and wishing he still had his infant in his arms, that the bottle he'd nursed him over dinner had lasted forever just for that moment. His child, no matter what age, always helped soothe his nerves, but the babe who couldn't talk stressed him out less. They all let out a breath of relief, Harry's loudest of all. He shivered slightly and rubbed at his arms, as if to chase away the rest of that sensation, even if it had always been in his head. Right. Sirius clapped his hands together with actual excitement. Back off for dinner then, now with chocolate for dessert. James chucked a pillow at him for his one-track mind. It doesn't seem likely, Remus muttered his disagreement, but there was also no denying the connection anymore either. I wouldn't base all possessions off of Ginny's one experience, James wearily told his son. You've been under the Imperious Curse. That's a form of possession, and you can remember everything that happens then as well. Harry muttered a thanks he didn't really feel for reminding him he could be wrong. James didn't press his point, as these were two very similar incidents, both involving Horcrux and all. I don't think having it in your pocket counts as lying around, Remus still tried, knowing it was a lost cause. My wand once went missing without my notice, Harry shot back. I'm not taking chances. He couldn't tell if it was of any comfort at all he no longer had this locket on his possession now. Had they found some way to destroy it, or had some mishap indeed happened, and he had lost it again for a careless day? That's as fair a conclusion as anything, Remus sighed. James fought back the urge to smack someone who wasn't here, trying his hardest not to be too hard on Ron for this attitude, since they'd found at least a temporary solution to his son's problem, and he was genuinely smiling again, relaxing back into his seat for the first time since he'd had the memory replaced of having that thing on. Harry watched them snicker as Lily's suggestion was actually used. Sirius went farther by saying, I think you should make that your new base. I'm not convinced the farmer wouldn't notice food for the three of them going missing so frequently. It could put him out, Lily disagreed. Traveling around to different farms then, Sirius shrugged. Exactly how many farm locations do you know? Harry rolled his eyes good-naturedly. We stumbled across this one and got lucky. Well then, don't count out your local wildlife for food or chance more markets, or Sirius, James sighed. Exactly how useful is this, pointing out how Harry should have been getting food instead of from the kitchen behind us? Fine, he sighed, though he still felt more bad for Ron than anything. They were struggling with this concept on the first few days. It was making him uneasy. I'm sure that's a very confused but delighted farmer, Lily snickered. I'm sure he's been telling her that for years, Remus smirked. It'll sink in any day now. Oh, he does admit to it, James scowled. I never denied they kept food away sometimes as a punishment, Harry shrugged, wincing at the look his father gave him for reminding what he had been evasive about. He decided to keep to himself how this seemed to be doing him some good, or at least, he felt better prepared for this life on the lam than others. They all muttered and shifted with unease, while Harry gave them a scowl, wanting to snap they should be grateful he was prioritizing safety overall. They kept their silence, though, forcing themselves to remember there wasn't anything they could do about it now. Harry stiffened, biting words on the edge of his tongue with no one to shoot them at in here. Even counting those lowly months from his 4th year, he'd fought more with Ran in these consecutive weeks than he had in all of knowing him. It wasn't leading to much of an adventure. I can't even blame him, Sirius sighed. Even having just eaten, the idea of this grueling task on an empty stomach seemed impossible. I can, James huffed. What good's it doing him to constantly point this out? Let's see you try it, Sirius rolled his eyes. I doubt it would go well. You couldn't go more than a week without going into the kitchens for extra snacks. Like you'd be any better, James muttered his answer, which Sirius didn't deny. Well, there's your answer right there, Remus shrugged. You need to continue all of what Dumbledore was doing, not just the Horcrux part. You need to keep digging into Voldemort's past and where he'd have put these. Harry twitched uneasily again for the semi-reprimand and got defensive. How was I supposed to do that? I don't have any idea how Dumbledore got a hold of those memories. The man didn't even seem to have any more to go off of after that cave, or I'd think he would have said so. He was near shouting at the end and realized it, apologizing quickly. Remus didn't seem bothered. He'd gotten into worse scrapes recently over something much less that indeed was in no way Harry's fault. He honestly agreed. They had no more idea what else there was to go on, but these three doing nothing about it but repetitive conversations wasn't helping matters. I don't suppose he'd be stupid enough to hide one at old Hepzibah's place, Sirius offered with a sigh. Seems unlikely. He stole them from there, and no matter how much time went in between, I don't think he'd likely come back, Remus disagreed. Besides, he wouldn't keep them somewhere so public, and Dumbledore said the rest of her family inherited everything but those two. Surely they're still on the lookout for them to this day. Maybe he built himself his own mansion, like he thought he deserved, and put one there, James offered. Can't imagine how Harry would be able to figure that out. Lily shivered at the idea of Harry going into Voldemort's home. There was no doubt it would be even worse than Grimwald Place as far as terrifying homes. Well, he's not wrong, James agreed with that logic. You do need a bit more to go on. If only you'd ever known where Quirrell ran into him there. It seems likely he was hiding out with one of his Horcruxes, Lily agreed. Did we ever find out the reason Voldemort went there? Sirius muttered to himself, but could recall nothing. Padfoot's got a point, Remus agreed. He seems to have a motive for every other place that's a bit outside of our area. Another orphanage field trip, James offered sarcastically, but it was all the more discouraging they were quickly realizing more every moment they had no idea what Voldemort's motive for doing hardly any of this was. At least he's honest, Remus snorted. It seems possible, though perhaps not straight away if he'd hidden it somewhere in there, Sirius speculated. Lucius would have had that diary on him the day you saw him in there, and no magic went off alerting Borgin something like that was in there, so he'd have to inspect it by hand. If, say, Voldemort hid it inside that vanishing cabinet, well, no one would have known for years. Don't like the idea of them raiding that shop in every corner for the chance to come across something they might not recognize any more than Borgin, James sighed. Harry couldn't help but smile around at them all anyways. The miserable time clouding his mind being consistently broken up by those around him, offering new ideas, or just a breath of new air, was the best thing he never would have thought to ask for. It's better than nothing, Harry thanked them by pointing out. I hope we try a bit of everything. Even as Remus went back to the book, though, his mood stayed in a constant flux of being sucked back into the drab past. I've always said you have better impulse control than I do, James snorted. He did put one there, Harry, Lily reminded in confusion. The diary. He didn't hide that there, Harry just as quickly pointed out. Malfoy gave it to Ginny to go there. Sure, that might have been Voldemort's plan as well someday, but he had it somewhere else, hidden safe with the Malfoys. There could still be another inside the school. You think it's down in the chamber? James asked uneasily. Could be anywhere, Sirius sighed in exhaustion at the idea, then shivered in disgust. If what Harry was saying was true, they would have walked past it for 7 years of their life and never even realized it. She really has far too much faith in him, Remus muttered, well aware of how hypocritical he sounded to himself. He certainly didn't find the diary until it was long done. He didn't even find it. Harry put it in his lap, James recalled with disgust. I can't think of any way to track these things, to check where any of them could be. Lily sighed at the almost endless possibility of it all. Even with Harry having access to Voldemort's mind, he couldn't exactly pluck out this vital information. We were having the same problem, Harry groaned. This is getting stupid, James snapped. Why's Ron being a prick about this, now of all times? He's never been so adamant about something so stupid in the past. The paranoia's setting in all around. Sirius tried to say in a goofy, whimsical kind of way, but it didn't come across right. They were all getting more stressed and uneasy the more Harry fought with his friends about this. They'd have thought these three would have worked this problem out better amongst themselves. I can see it, Sirius met Harry's eyes. It wasn't a pleasant feeling to understand any of Voldemort's deranged mind, but the place was an escape from a life you were born into. He didn't disagree with Harry at all. For once, Harry didn't at all feel ashamed of this similarity being highlighted. If it helped him to stop Voldemort, then that was the real difference. See if that works some sense into him, James Mark pleasantly agreed. Never seems to do Sirius any good, Remus rolled his eyes. That's a lot of assumptions, Lily arched a brow in disagreement. Dumbledore has no proof one way or another Voldemort never actually found this other founder's object. He just guessed that's what Voldemort would be using. He could have come across it while he was still in school, and Voldemort didn't have proof of it like he did the ring. You try telling her that, Harry grumbled. As always, it had been impossible to sway Hermione to his opinion. Voldemort could have done it himself, honestly, Sirius shrugged. Lily shivered at the idea of orphans still being inside while he'd done this, and hoped he'd just never thought of the place again. It would be like Harry putting one at the Dursleys, or me one in Grimmauld Place, Sirius muttered in disgust, but agreement. I think we're missing some extra layer of problem here, Remus frowned as he eyed Sirius. We're assuming they'll all be at some place Voldemort intended. That locket switched hands, what 4 times before Harry tracked it down, and I don't think Voldemort even realized it. Harry threw his hands up in exasperation and collapsed in his seat with exhaustion at just the implication of that. Remus winced, but didn't bother to apologize. He couldn't take it back considering how true that was. Harry perked up with excitement, some feeling definitely tingling in the base of his mind for this place being mentioned. The others noticed. Riddle never had money as a kid to have had a vault there. James cocked his head to the side. And I don't think being a megalomaniac oppressor rakes in the galleons much for him to have set up an account there now. The idea still holds some merit, Remus offered. As Hagrid once said, it's the safest place to keep something. The goblins would do the work for him of making it almost impossible to get anything out of there. Now we're back to the exact same problem, though. How to search such a place, Sirius sighed. Fingers crossed in particular they were off the mark on this one. He had no desire to go there any time soon, considering what was in the bowels of that bank. The goblins might help Harry figure it out, though, Lily said with a bit of excitement, just because she'd seen her boy growing despondent again already. They don't want Voldemort in power any more than us. If Harry asks them, they might tell. I wouldn't bet on it. Remus shook his head in disagreement. Goblin politics were a sticky mess even before wizards got involved into their affairs. That makes a perverse amount of sense, Remus said in sympathy. That scar seems to be your link to Voldemort, for whatever inexplicable reason, and the Horcrux is also housing his soul. Harry turned white as snow for a moment and looked likely to faint, but his parents offered comfort at once to distract him while Sirius smacked Moony. He winced and did apologize for that one. They'd all long since realized pointing that stuff out to Harry never seemed to help him. Does he still think Voldemort's hanging around the burrow? James asked in confusion. It's a little fair, Sirius shrugged. The first time Ron got a full blast of the power of this was the snake attacking his dad, who seemingly had nothing to do with anything. James nodded his agreement to that. I'm hoping for the exact opposite. Lily screeched, eyes particularly on Remus, but mind on everyone. None of them had yet learned what had become of their friend after that disastrous fight with Harry, whether he'd even gone back to Tonks or what he was doing now, and through Voldemort's eyes was certainly not a way they wanted to find out. That's both a good thing and a bad thing, Remus hedged to try and distract them all from the unknown they couldn't bear to face. As long as he knows no more about it than us, he'll stay distracted from, well, farthing this crusade of killing the world. Always looking on the bright side you are, Sirius snickered in agreement. What other new avenues were you trying? Remus asked. Harry fidgeted uncomfortably with a scowl in place, and they all winced at the heavy silence that followed. Gathered from it, the three seemed to have resorted to not talking at all, for everything they all wanted to know varied so greatly at this point, any topic was shot down by the other two. This inevitably wasn't going to last long without someone having quite an awful fight. Even the best of friends needed a break from each other, especially in such a high-tense environment as they were now constantly living. Wouldn't be the first time, Lily groaned at this repetition. Didn't they know how much that hurt him? Doesn't make it less bloody annoying, Harry snapped. That's ridiculous. No way they'd think you were hiding something like that. James rolled his eyes. You've always shared everything every step of the way, sometimes when they didn't even return the favor. Harry wasn't going to disagree, his bad mood at the idea of his friends reaching the highest peak it ever had. Leadership, Lily scoffed. I thought this was supposed to be a group effort, and to be honest, you all seem to be lacking on helping each other from what I'm hearing. Is it beyond you to even go filch a paper? Sirius asked, completely aghast. This was the route Harry was on. Even while you were in school, that's how you learned the majority of what was going on around you, that and eavesdropping on the teachers. And Hermione's library, Remus inserted. Right, Sirius waved his hand so dramatically he smacked Remus in the face without noticing. I really don't understand any of you thinking just spinning in the same circles at this point is helping. We really weren't talking much at all to get out of it, Harry grudgingly admitted, but tried to say defensively no matter how weak it was. You do realize that's not making us feel any better, James needlessly pointed out, and when Harry didn't respond to that, Remus rushed on in hopes the cycle would break soon. It does seem that way to those not in the know, Sirius sighed, remembering back to his excitement of learning how to do spells to make cake just appear in front of him before McGonagall crushed that dream. She was, James scoffed, forcing himself not to make a crack about him dropping out of school possibly 2 years too early. Actually, I just went with it, because she's the best at charms. What she's implying didn't even occur to me until she pointed it out, Remus shrugged. Do you really want to be agreeing with Ron right now? James rolled his eyes at Mooney. Not particularly. Even when he's making a good point, it sounds ass-worthy, Remus shrugged. Surprised she hasn't done that long before now, honestly, Lily agreed. I'm surprised, Harry. You usually just walk away, James tried for a laugh, but Harry paid him no mind, answering in an almost absent way. That's not why. Intrigued, but also weary something had finally snapped Harry's attention away, Remus read on carefully. I'd almost forgot what it was to feel adrenaline by this time. All my senses were on high alert, Harry muttered, even now shifting in place and fighting the urge to draw his wand on nothing in this brightly lit living room. I'm sure it's not Death Eaters again. There's been too much space between whatever happened to you at that cafe. Lily urged herself to remain calm as much as anyone. Shouldn't be an enemy at all. But then again, those sneakoscopes are never easy to interpret, Sirius muttered. James resisted the urge to point out Harry really could have been doing that much more often. Though it would have been repetitive to constantly be summoning fish to you, it still sounded better than the plants they'd been living off of, but now didn't seem the time. I suddenly have no idea what's going on, Remus muttered, gazing down at this revelation. A human, traveling around with goblins. Sirius agreed slowly. The world truly has gone mad by your time, Harry. It only took a moment for them to think of a cheerful man named Ted Harry had a vague memory of. Oh no, Remus went a ghastly color and shook all over. His eyes darted to the door with dread again, but this time for the entirely opposite reason. If he'd gone back and been too late to save a family housing a muggle-born like Ted Tonks. Or worse, he didn't know at all and still didn't care. Sirius had to pinch him hard to get his attention and force him to keep going, reminding him the others were having just as dreadful thoughts. "Oh, thank Merlin," Remus whispered, losing all air and rubbing at his face to try and force blood flow to come back. Even with the confirmation Ted had decided to make a run for it rather than being forced into it, he couldn't fight off the image now dancing in his head, which had seamlessly merged with the one James had begun. What if he was wrong, and he would do the child more good than harm? Then it was all ripped away from him before he'd given himself a chance. He suddenly couldn't live with that idea any more than inflicting his infection on an innocent child in the first place. The two ideas twirled side by side, spinning until his whole head was likely to fall right off. "Mooney," James called gently, just about the only thing that would have got his attention. Prongs had made his view perfectly clear on at least one of these issues. "Tonks is fine. Her dad would have mentioned otherwise." He felt weak, like the monster he still was, admitting even half of him had been nursing the same worry and decided to just ignore him. Even someone who didn't know him as well as they did would have seen this farce, and James exchanged a look with Lily. Not quite hopeful, but the urge to hope Remus was starting to hear some of what they were saying. "Surely not the dean from your year?" Sirius asked, with just as much excitement at this coincidence as to break the heavy silence. That was definitely his voice. Harry cheered, allowing the distraction for this good news. A part of him he hadn't even realized was there until now had been worried for his dorm mate and every student at school he knew of their heritage like the Creevies, who would have been suffering for this like Hermione. But then, you'd think he'd be with his mother. Lily yelped in concern. Not if they didn't know where she was living, if maybe someone like McGonagall had brushed all records of the Muggle-born's addresses from the school so they couldn't get mail anymore. James quickly tried to explain, rather than the horrid alternative his mum was already dead. "I thought that was done by some quill." Harry couldn't help but ask anyways, even with the more gruesome option now being even more likely. "Just because magic normally does it doesn't mean it can't be done manually," Sirius said with confidence. "There are more than the Weasleys fighting back. I just know it. Those Death Eaters are likely having to hunt down door to door and dare not go into the open against all Muggles just yet when there's still rebellion afloat. Dean probably left his mother somewhere secure, maybe even with Seamus, Mum, before he took off." Harry didn't know how safe anyone would be with Mrs. Finnegan, considering she hadn't even believed him when you know who had even first been back, and how she felt about the views going on now, let alone the fact Seamus. Own dad would be in much the same situation as Dean's mum, so would one witch be able to protect two muggles, let alone Dean's three little sisters, whom his old dorm mate had mentioned sporadically. Harry didn't even know their names, and still worried about their safety. Remus was sufficiently distracted from his own future dilemma at all of these prospects about people they had an even less grasp on than his future wife and child. Then why wouldn't Dean have just stayed with them if he felt his mum was safe? No one had any more comebacks, and it only made their worry grow for this future. "Again," James muttered distractedly. Something seemed to be wrong with that poor bloke every time he was mentioned. "I find that very hard to imagine," Remus said quietly. While the species as a whole had no love of wizards, he found it unlikely they'd go so far as to help along the decimation of more than half their population. They more likely stayed out of it than anything, and gave the wrong impression in this way. Harry spluttered in disbelief at this idea, but none of the others looked very surprised. It made a certain amount of sense. After all, the Death Eaters weren't just going to let the piles of gold under their feet not be in their hands, along with every life they wanted. The goblins would do what they could to hold their ground, but already it was apparent things weren't going to last much longer. "I'd do that myself for free," James leered. "Speak for yourself. I'm not getting eaten by a bloody dragon when I can curse the Death Eaters much easier," Sirius grumbled. "I think I get it," Remus muttered, looking to the others as if for confirmation at this idea on the edge of his mind, but it wasn't quite coming into focus. Sirius waved him on impatiently, muttering about goblins and their riddles and hoping for a straight answer. Lily spluttered something indecent in her shock, but Remus was going on with a sort of high now for getting an answer to something. The sword was still at school. Or not. Depending on whatever it was these goblins were talking about, he forced his own brain to shut off this time and read on in a hurry. Remus made a disgusted little noise. Anyone was still asking for something relevant to be coming of that. He had half a mind to put the useless thing out of business at this rate. I still don't see what the goblins have to do with the sword, Sirius muttered, as he bounced uneasily in place for a clear explanation. Harry startled in a panic, Ginny's name on his lips in true fear for what this could mean. That's actually a good question, Sirius agreed. What reason does she have for this? She knows it was left to Harry, James reminded. Maybe she was trying to steal it for him, only knowing it was supposed to be his and some way to spite Snape. I'm okay with that, Sirius viciously agreed. Did you guys miss the part where they were caught? Harry hissed, Lily having to hold his arm to stop him tearing the book from Remus to find out what had happened in consequence for this. Harry suddenly looked as if he had to go to the bathroom terribly. He was bouncing in place, and his expression was screwed up with immense pain. Sirius tried to laugh in relief, but he was the only one. He still tried in a forced, cheerful tone. Well, Dumbledore must have switched it out then in case this happened. That can't be right, Lily disagreed. He was planning to give it to Harry. He wouldn't give him a fake. There's no way it was swapped any other time in Dumbledore's care. He would have known, James returned. Maybe Ginny did manage to swap it with a fake before Snape noticed, Remus offered. It's possible, but I find it hard to believe. Sirius scratched at his nose in thought. Harry couldn't think of anything to say, shivering in place and fighting off the urge to roll into the fetal position and never come out. Answers were right on the edge of his mind. He'd swear steam was coming out of his ears, but the others finally stopped their speculations and went back for more answers, though none of them really thought the goblin knew where the real one was. They all tried to join in as well, especially the marauders, as they valued this underhanded trickery to Snape. But it was still forced, as they all knew what this really was, just another layer of the puzzle being added. I almost forgot about that, Sirius snickered with a sideways look at Harry. I didn't, James rolled his eyes. He'd had a list of everyone who'd asked Lily out before she said yes to him. I'm a bit surprised you haven't revealed yourself by now to be asking this yourself, Remus offered. Hadn't even occurred to me yet. We were still listening, Harry shrugged. Poor Seamus. I'll bet that's who he's really wanting to ask about, Lily sighed, thinking of the two inseparable friends now on opposite ends like this. How many countless students were feeling even more alone because their friends couldn't be there. Harry spluttered in concern, clutching the ring on his finger painfully tight to him now. Remus couldn't help but silently tick off on his head all of it. Ginny, Charlie and Fred seemed the only ones unscathed by this war as far as the public knew, and they knew better. The youngest had suffered Voldemort's soul first. I do usually cause those, but I don't think that needed to be brought up right now, Sirius shrugged, but Harry didn't even flinch at the old joke as James poked him instead. I always said I liked Ted's sense of humor too, Sirius said bleakly, not caring he was jabbed again. He watched Harry relax and mutter to himself in relief, which was all that mattered. You're on the run from psychopaths who want you dead because you couldn't prove you're not a pureblood bastard like half of those liars, Lily said in pure disgust. I think the truth would be obvious. Harry offered her a thankful smile to all of them. Even with his past as evidence, some part of him still seemed to expect someone to call him on these stories as all in his head, in a far more figurative sense. I always knew we underestimated the rest of your dorm mates, Remus said fondly. It wasn't doing Dumbledore much good from what I was hearing, James huffed in protest. Just because he doesn't publicize his every move like those useless ministers doesn't mean he's not doing something important. I wish I could even before this. Sirius perked up with interest for where this was heading. Lily cooed with pride. There really were still people out there aside from the Order doing the right thing. He's just jealous, Remus rolled his eyes. He'll probably be getting them any moment now. Sirius snorted at the reactions they'd be hearing of Harry announcing himself. They'll never, both his parents vowed at once. If anything, because they would have already publicized the hell out of it just to prove they had and crush any last resistance, Remus agreed. Can't just take the easy answer, can you, Moony? Sirius rolled his eyes. You really weren't going to have a chat with them? James asked in surprise. You could trust them at least enough not to drag you off to Voldemort right away, and the lot of you are having the problem of not knowing anything that's going on. If you hadn't stumbled across this, Merlin knows how long you would have kept going. I certainly wasn't going to risk it that moment, Harry defended, and I'd rather discuss what we just heard with them first, he finished with some high-end emotion. Excitement, he was sure. There was something even more important he was about to remember. That's brilliant. Sirius even pumped the air with his fist in triumph. That painting's going to be useful for something. He'd have seen what happened. I'm convinced those portraits don't ever sleep. They've learned to fake it for so long they can't. James tried to brush aside, though they all worried if this had been the case. Sucking up to him also does wonders. Sirius rolled his eyes, even in his excitement. Sirius snickered with delight, but while James looked amused as well, he still asked, "Why? What good would it do him to see the inside of your tent?" He already knows he's been relocated from his house, though he may not recognize Hermione's voice well enough to know who she'd be with, he finally conceded. Why's she still calling him that? Sirius rolled his eyes. Remus face palmed while James looked at Harry in disbelief. You couldn't go a whole minute keeping your mouth shut while Hermione asked this. Harry tried his best to ignore him and focus on the book. It wasn't working as Remus was clucking his tongue and laughing just as much. James couldn't help but burst out laughing. I'll bet Neville hasn't had a detention in there since first year. I'm sure he's not pleased at the repeat performance. I'd probably be living in that forest rather than that joke of a school, Sirius smirked. She's really not doing herself any good by correcting him. Lily shifted anxiously for the rest of the answers they were hoping for. I recall yours not being a particular cake walk. Remus shivered in remembrance. I'm sure, what with me not being around and all, they really were just doing something that didn't put them in danger with Hagrid around. Harry beamed. The lot of them shivered for the suggestion. It had been on all of their minds with the Carrows running that school. I wonder if the blindfold will come off when he leaves the painting, Sirius sighed with regret. Sadly not Harry, Lily gently explained. Only the paintings can travel between their partners. They can't share that with someone. Harry nodded in disappointment, but his turbulent emotions wouldn't let him feel too down. He still felt high energy for something else happening tonight, though the longer he thought about it, it wasn't feeling like a good thing. There it is, James whooped with excitement. Proof we were right. Dumbledore didn't leave you entirely empty-handed. Or at least, he tried not to, Lily sighed with agreement. Even the noble way Scrim went out didn't make his final actions feel any better. I can't imagine why he would if he hadn't asked. Remus gasped. Now he probably will just because of this, Harry. He shrunk back at the scolding and agreed that had been a very impulsive question he hadn't thought through. Either way, the answer wouldn't be of help to him. That I do believe, Sirius snorted, remembering their prediction Snape would be run ragged even more than Umbridge by that school. You had me up until there. Remus frowned at them, assuming it was Dumbledore who had done this. I can't imagine when Dumbledore would have done this, let alone why. Yourself just said he was still using it to destroy Horcruxes. Maybe he had someone tasked with doing it. It's so valuable he must have had a contingency for this, Harry insisted as his mind scrambled to put something together, all the while nailing him with pain again. McGonagall, he tried, swallowing painfully, and gave up on anything else. The others didn't argue the point, as they had no more idea about this. Where's Ron on this? Lily asked in surprise, as he hadn't been mentioned through all of this. Harry didn't even seem to hear her, he was so distracted. That man and those bloody riddles of his are going to be the death of MU. Sirius quickly changed words at the last minute, but this brutal reminder only caused his friends to flinch again. It's possible, James agreed, looking a bit amused at this. It was certainly a place he'd go and check on again, just for nostalgia, before the even more sharp reminder hit him of what happened the last time his three friends had all been in there with Harry. Not a particular occasion he wanted to look back on. He hid a lot of stuff from the rest of the Order. I don't know how I take that, Remus grumbled, shifting protectively close to Sirius. Sorry, Harry, I don't think you got that one. Lily sighed heavily, her own burden of carrying this around never having left until it was too late as well. What's his problem? James asked in surprise. You lot have just been given a major revelation. Where's the cheer you three have desperately needed? Harry didn't answer again, and they looked at him in surprise to see him taking on a defensive face. something they'd seen a lot recently as they continued to hack into his every move with more questions than he ever had answers to. Couldn't anyone ever just give him a break? Remus shifted uneasily. He was getting a very ugly reminder of how Ron was acting the night Harry's name came out of the goblet, and none of them at all liked how this was starting. All of you don't know, James dangerously corrected in a cold voice. What was with him doing nothing but complaining lately, when usually Ron was their best source of amusement? It all had to come out eventually. Lily tried to hedge this upcoming fight. At least now the lot of you can work it out, she finished in a small voice, as Harry's face continued to grow far more stormy than whatever rain had been happening during this. They have, Sirius bristled for these accusations. All thanks to Harry. If he hadn't dragged them to Grimwald Place, they never would have found out about Regulus and the locket. He's the one who got left the sword to give this hint. What's Ron done then? Harry didn't feel any better for the validations, for no matter what Sirius or anyone around him said, none of them were the ones he truly needed to talk to right now. There's no way I mean to say surely. Lily couldn't believe Ron had really been thinking any such thing. But the hard truth was maybe he hadn't thought this through as much as the other two. Harry and Hermione had assured they had nothing to go back to until this was done. Ron didn't have that same luxury, and the bitter reminder of what his family was going through while he wasn't there must have struck him even harder than any of them would have guessed. Now he is just being delusional, Remus grumbled under his breath. He'd been reading all of this in a very subdued voice for yet another fight breaking out amongst a close-knit family. I think he needed to get this off his chest, Lily insisted. You'll all feel much better airing this out. Maybe you lot could even, I don't know, try to get in contact with the rest of the Weasleys somehow, James offered in consolation. Go visit the twins' shops in disguise and pass along a message. Do something to make him feel better about his family being on the outs. Harry wished he'd thought of that. He wished he'd thought of anything other than the rage coloring his mind now. Remus' voice continued to grow ever fainter. They were having to strain to hear him now. It felt like even more walls were closing in around Harry, that even without trying now Voldemort was taking over even in places he never should have before. Harry and his friends were the heart of their future, and now they were being forced to listen to it break again. Don't, James whispered, looking suddenly terrified at his son. Don't goad him like that. He might. He'll really do it if Hermione doesn't do something fast. Sirius finished viciously, bright anger beginning to flare up in him for this new path having been kicked wide open. While it was true they'd almost laughed this instance off, it was now very clear Ron hadn't. This little nugget may have even been some kind of confirmation to him of how much he was missing out on learning of his family from strangers now. They were all stricken this was how he was handling it, but holding this firmly in mind kept them from even considering joining Harry's taunts of Ron abandoning one family for another. Don't care. Don't care. James blustered, his hands flying around for some way to emphasize how ludicrous he found that statement. He was well aware that was the only family his son had ever known, and Ron nor anyone could take that away from him. As much as he still harbored a grudge against Molly for the way she'd treated Sirius, as angry as he was at Ron right now, he still understood why he was saying these things. He just wasn't happy about it. Remus was down to whispering by then, and still recoiled in disgust for having said something so callous as that. James and Lily would be no more voluntarily out of the way of this than Voldemort would wave a white flag. Harry tried to hold on to his anger in all of this, that Ron of all people had been the reason he'd been forced to shout this to the heavens again in his life. But the feeling was already being diminished, as he only shared his best friend's fears. All five of them winced at that deceleration, the four around Harry knowing all too well how that could happen, and how permanent it could be, but still trying their best to cling that Harry would not suffer this as well. Remus couldn't bear to keep going for fear of that answer, eyes flickering to Harry's stricken face. How alone had the boy truly been before being dumped into their life? Some part of Harry's mind wanted to laugh at that, for Ron's belief people always chose him, and his best friend had once again been overlooked. He'd never seen it that way, and Ron was once again. Had they ever seen things clearly before now? In that one bleak second where he'd been the one to tear these two apart, Harry couldn't recall a single moment of the past 6 years of his life where the three could smile. Some absent part of Sirius' fried brain remembered what had started this. If perhaps Ted and Dean would get a nasty surprise and somehow stop this horrid event from continuing. But the hope was dashed with the next words out of Mooney's mouth. No, no, no. Lily shook her head furiously to clear that away. You two, you'll work this out. You. She trailed off miserably as Harry gave nothing away, his face pale but completely set in his past outrage. He wished he could look ahead and promise Voldemort was not the reason for another friendship torn beyond repair. But for all he knew, this was the last time he'd ever seen Ron HPHPHPHPHPHPHP. Okay, so we know that's not true, but it's a great cliffhanger anyways. This is a moment loads of Ron haters love to say, how he abandoned them again. Yet, I really get this one. Unlike in Garth, where he was being a giant turd, I can genuinely see where Ron's worry for his family finally pushed him too far in having to hear of news of his sister like this. The rest of the circumstances weren't helping, and finally Harry and Ron pushed each other too far. I know the anger should be there, but I can't fully justify it. I couldn't have them shouting about him during this. That being said, this plot point annoys the crap out of me more than any other in series, because it's pointless. At least in other parts of the plot I've griped about in the past, still had something to do with furthering characters. The mess of Six, Remus, Tonks, take your pick. But what does doing this to Ron serve? Absolutely nothing. The information he comes back with could have just as easily been gained if these three idiots had taken a break and gone to visit the Weasleys like should have happened, instead of Ron storming off. It's a pointless thread in the last book of the series. Lastly, I'll stop hopping on the food thing after this chapter, but really these three were limiting themselves far more than they should for no good reason, except to make this situation extra miserable. So Harry's plan to use the invisibility cloak once didn't work. You really couldn't have tried again. They heard the idea of summoning fish, and yet were never shown them recreating that idea, even if they didn't think of it themselves. Even if Hermione forgot to pack food, of all things when she packed a library, no one ever suggested going into a Muggle town to buy some. Admittedly, Ron or Harry should have also thought up packing for the food, and it's not entirely Hermione's fault. But I didn't see them offering ideas either. It feels contrived, and I'll be honest, my first time reading this book up to this point had been a lot of disappointment. Next chapter isn't even anything better to look forward to, just a different kind of awful. Chapter 16, Godric's Hollow. Chapter text. I've been dreading doing this chapter, and the next more than any other in series, because of how depressing they are. Worse than any character deaths, they're a different kind of misery, and one I find very hard to write through with such lively people. I apologize greatly for how lacking these probably feel in advance. HPHPHPHPHPHPHP Harry could not imagine a worse feeling than this. He was now convinced he'd lose everyone in his life. His first and best friend just another person on the list now lost to him forever. He just knew when he opened his eyes and the rest of his memories were forced back to him, he'd lose Hermione next. She'd grow tired of this fruitless mission and go to the Weasleys, who would keep her safe and in hiding with love and care. He didn't dare to try and look into whatever memories he had left to scrounge together a feeling about any of this, for he was convinced it would only make things worse. He was vaguely aware of his dad holding his shoulder, but was thankful for the silence, as none of them offered words of comfort. He wouldn't have been able to stand falsities right now or diatribe about Ron in his defense. He just sat there and absorbed the shock, trying to brace himself against the next realization of what the rest of his life would hold. Lily finally forced herself to accept the book and try to keep going, no matter the hopeless look upon her son's face. She could never stand to do nothing about that, and if getting him caught up with how he'd wound up here was all she could do to help him alleviate this newest pain, she'd press on full steam. Harry shivered and looked longingly towards the stairs, to peace and a real break from his life. He knew it would do no good. It wasn't too late into the evening yet, and he wouldn't be able to sleep regardless. Sirius retched theatrically at the comparison, but no one paid him any mind. They were all too busy with the crowded noise of their own. Sirius was just trying to distract his, and huffed in disappointment he hadn't been given the chance. James muttered to himself about how that likely wasn't going to fix anything, then winced as he broke the silence. I'd be more surprised if she had, Lily said quietly, just as surprised Harry apparently did. Sirius cursed and muttered much more strongly than Prongs had about that deserter. Anger was more familiar to him anyways than this empty feeling of shock over Harry's lost friend. But he was no more acknowledged. Remus wavered for a moment before deciding against saying something. He wanted to offer comfort. Harry could at least know the fate of his friend, could go to the burrow now and confront him if he really needed to. But for now, he felt Harry's pride wouldn't allow any such thing to happen. Can't make her do all the work, I suppose, James offered in a forced light tone that Harry was still ignoring. Please let this ending be more like their beginning, Lily pleaded as she fought against clearing her throat and continuing. Ron had once made Hermione cry as well, and that had turned out to be one of the best things in her life. Couldn't the idiot come back and make it right again somehow? James gave a bleak sort of laugh as he remembered this being discussed as a joke, but with all three at the school like they should have been. I'm sure she does love, Lily promised at once, anything to lighten that haggard face. You two were perfectly clear why you weren't together anymore, but I doubt she's there fawning over Seamus any more than you're after Vila. Harry tried for a smile for his mother, no matter how forced it felt, trying to take whatever comfort he could. He believed her, and Ginny hadn't forgotten about him any more than he had her. Still, he gazed at the ring on his finger and again wondered why he wore it when she felt so far away. I can offer easy, no arguments needed reasons for both, Sirius offered, but Harry didn't respond, and he was grateful. He would have done it had Harry asked, but it would have just been more depressing than helping with any anger. Not that he meant to, Remus couldn't help but mutter, but that only opened another whole vault of memories no one needed reminding of in why Harry truly was so alone with this. Harry could just as easily imagine this now. That the next memory to come back would be him, waking up alone in an empty tent. How he'd stumbled into this time with no memories would always be a mystery, and there was no one left who even cared. James shifted restlessly, fighting back the urge to tell his son he was only exhibiting the same problems as before Ron left, if not worse now. He didn't see how it would do him any good, though, so kept his mouth shut. You two are truly desperate to be having casual chats with him, Sirius grumbled. Nice choice of words there, Remus congratulated. I'm a lost cause already. James raised his hand in surrender. No surprise there. Lily beamed with pride all the same for some good news still existing out there. I'm sure she's wrought with grief. Sirius rolled his eyes, as surely the sister on such good terms with the twins knew of all the secret passages. Just because Umbridge isn't around any more doesn't make it less stupid. Remus snorted. That school's likely more a madhouse than Dumbledore's whole head, James said with forced cheerfulness. I'm sure they're even still calling it that, Lily chuckled with pride. Ginny did name it after all. You never believe you'll want to go back until you're long past, James agreed fondly. Well, you pulled that off with only a few hiccups, Remus offered. I'm sure you could sneak in, and McGonagall will slip you all the biscuits you need while you attend classes and hide out under Neville's bed. Harry managed a genuinely surprised and humored snort of laughter, finally, and they all managed to breathe just a bit again. None of them would ever stop trying to keep that frozen look of unease away from the surface of his mind. Seems neither party's going to learn their lesson, Lily said cautiously, trying to skip around how much time seemed to be passing during this bit. Harry was still shifting anxiously, but seemed to be growing accustomed to this new view on his memories, and none of them were fond of how it seemed to be making him even bleaker than when he'd constantly been wearing that Horcrux. Yet they still couldn't hate Ron for it. Unlike the last time he'd so harshly blamed Harry for circumstances beyond his control, Ron had simply had a very human moment of caving to his fears, abandoning one family for another. They wanted to be angry. They certainly resented him for the way he'd done it. But between the feelings the Horcrux was inducing in him as surely as Harry and the painful reminder of what he was missing out from in his family, their fury could not be ignited. At least you're getting to travel. That's got to be some highlight you never got in the past, Sirius offered enthusiastically. Was something he'd certainly love to do. How the four of them had always planned on seeing the world before they settled down for life in as roundabout a way there and back, just to see what there was out there. Then they'd been inducted into the Order and put those plans on hold until after it was safe. Now Sirius was starting to fear hearing Harry's bleak and sketchy backgrounds was all he was ever going to get to visualize. Lily gripped the book uncomfortably as they were again reminded of Harry's desire. They couldn't blame him one bit for this, and he wasn't wrong. It seemed the only option they had right now to try and suss out some new information. Otherwise, these two were just going to be spinning their wheels for the next year, it seemed. She just wasn't so sure she wanted to share in the moment of Harry seeing what the Dementors made him hear. "Can someone please put that on the Hogwarts menu?" James chuckled. "I'm sure the house elves can make that a specialty." "You put more thought into asking Hermione about this than you did breaking into the ministry," Remus snorted. Harry only looked minorly affronted. He really couldn't deny their end results. "Merlin's pants, someone get that girl some homework," Sirius yelped. "She's officially been reading the same book for how many months now? Can you get better than an O on something?" "I think Hermione's striving for a new grade," James agreed. Harry couldn't help but smile as everyone around him got a laugh out of that. At least they were still enjoying themselves. "Unless it involves Quidditch or Parseltown, I have no clue what she's on about." Sirius grinned at Harry, who chose to ignore that one as well. "That's nothing new between you two," Remus began with a smirk, which quickly froze, and he stopped himself abruptly from reminding Ron had been a good bridge there. "I sort of remember that being mentioned," James agreed, casting his mind back to something actually peaceful like the wedding. "Oh yeah, Crumb threw a fit about it, Grindelwald's mark," Sirius remembered. So much had happened since then, it hadn't stuck as the most important thing of a guest's complaint. "What's that doing in a kid's book?" Lily asked, looking sick. "Maybe it really does have some other meaning then," Remus offered. "Who knows how many hands that passed through before Dumbledore lent it to Hermione? His mind was on the book, possibly the very same book now in the infant's room. I'm still stuck on why he created a mark and never advertised it more," James shrugged. "The man got busy, I suppose." Sirius rolled his eyes. "I think you mean, because he used to be an aura, he should be an expert on dark stuff," Remus corrected. "After all, minister is supposed to be more of a delicate position, handling so many affairs at once and juggling all the departments and muggle affairs. Not particularly an expert on any one thing, but a jack of all trades, if you will. Can you imagine Fudge pretending he knew what he was doing with dark arts?" Sirius snorted. "A pot with a foot sticking out of it makes sense about the story, though," James sighed. "This doesn't seem to have much to do with the three brothers." Lily couldn't help but pause, fidgeting with unease in the silence following her own words. "Well, that was easier than I thought." Sirius forced a surprised chuckle rather than shriveling up and screaming like his insides were doing. "Why would she think that mark's there?" James asked. "Because they are really running down every loose end they can," Lily sighed. "Oh," they all muttered at catching up with her. "I don't know, you think that's too on the nose?" Sirius asked. "Nothing about this has been obvious." Harry protested. "Yeah, and it's not as if it hurts any to check around the place, for any particular reason either have in mind," Remus cautiously agreed, though no one really wanted to hear of Harry's time there, as it was a shoe-in for more depressing reminders of everything he'd lost. None of them could deny the place's importance to Harry. Harry didn't even need to look over to see the sarcasm already flying forth from his godfather. "No, Harry, obviously they named the place Godric after Helga Hufflepuff. Did you ever put it down?" James challenged. "Harry, that was just depressing." Lily huffed. "I think this is the first lively conversation you two have had since you left Grimwald Place, possibly since the wedding." Sirius gasped in horror. Harry didn't deny it, which only made them feel worse. "Didn't you name Hedwig from that book?" James asked kindly, and got exactly what he was hoping for as Harry fondly agreed. "I've been quite distraught not to hear her catchphrase as of late," Sirius agreed. "Ah, is reading it actually necessary?" Remus groaned. "It's not as if you've heard it before," Lily shot back, before reading it extra loudly. James's eyes lit with interest, thinking if Harry did have to go there at least that would be fun to hear of rather than other places. Like that. He shivered and repressed the urge to be sick at the thought of Lily having a grave, let alone his, let alone hauntings above them. "I've never been more grateful to be irrelevant," James managed an awkward smile. "Hermione seems to forget not everyone has a one-track mind like her," Remus agreed, as that had been on Harry's mind since the end of his last year. Harry felt a funny tickling sensation in the pit of his gut, but it was so dull and foreign to him, What that could mean any more, he hardly gave it a passing thought. "That girl is going to give us a heart attack one day," Lily said mildly. "As if she hasn't already," James sighed. "I've stopped trying to count the amount of times she's freaked out over something, starting with her first homework assignment." Harry couldn't help but snort in surprise, a welcome grin once again on his face, considering what they were all fixing to hear about. "There's no way that's the secret that was in the letter," Remus muttered, mostly to himself. None of this had even happened when Lily was writing Sirius. "Still stuck on that one," Sirius chuckled. "There's got to be some connection between the two we're missing. Hopefully Harry finds it while he's there," Remus shrugged. James gave an uneasy laugh of agreement just because Harry looked like he needed it. They all bitterly agreed yet again none of this had been much explained at all. "Personally, I was more ecstatic at the news of tinned pears, but to each their own," Sirius shrugged. "Probably a better option," Lily agreed, "so long as you can convince Bathelder you are who you say you are. Any other way could be problematic. Plenty of people have charms about their house to let them know when someone's hiding on their property." Remus snorted and tried to repress the rest of his laughter with a lot of effort. "You do that quite a lot to your friend, to Hermione," he awkwardly finished at the end. Harry couldn't quite muster up the same laugh. In fact, if they didn't know any better, he was doing the same to them now, and only absently agreeing, while delving into the thoughts in his head again. Lily tried her hardest to read this next part in the same way, to match her son's excitement and see it from his perspective. But even she heard her voice was lackluster, at best being so brutally reminded for days on end now how their life had ended in the place Harry was about to go to. Lily and James exchanged a broken look for only a second, but Harry sitting in between them forced them to gobble together something else before he had to see for too long. "We want all of that for you, love," Lily sighed. "I'm sure you know we'd have done anything for you to get that and more." It felt pointless to tell him something he clearly knew, but she felt like she had to say something to his guilty expression, as if he needed to apologize for letting his mind being shown right here. He could only quickly agree, and ushered her on instead of lingering on the travesty that was his past, highlighted more every day he was here where he was supposed to be all along. Some absent part of James' mind was almost thankful they, in fact, had moved to Godric's Hollow for all of this to happen. If the deed had been done here, he didn't know how he'd be able to spend another second in this house they'd claimed. All the memories of their time here as he and Lily lived a happily married life would be tainted with Voldemort's shadow. At least in such a place as Godric's Hollow, it would forever be far enough away he wouldn't have to associate it with home. He did wonder for the first time what had happened here. Had some family moved into this empty space long after they'd left and made it the happy home his son was now dreaming of? It was the best outcome for such a place he could imagine. Harry had to swallow painfully a few times, but he'd never missed the opportunity to remind those bleak faces, "At least now I have the best memories." He got what he'd been hoping for, and they smiled at him. These 2 weeks here were now ingrained in him so deeply he was convinced he could never forget a single detail. These were moments even magic could never have replicated. Lily forced out a strangled breath, but her chest only constricted tighter in the next moment. No matter what she did, she could not force away the tight pain flashing all over her. She'd never been to this village, and now she never could without falling to the pavement sobbing. Then she laughed, a hysterical little bubble of noise, but one matched all around for the release they'd really needed, breaking at least the smallest part of the tension that they could do nothing to vanish from their home. "I swear you lot will never learn," James fervently told Harry, something any first-year figured out when trying to sneak out of the castle during the colder months. They'd even gone to Hagrid's enough times he'd have thought at least this was obvious. Harry looked appropriately sheepish, even joined in on laughing at his past slip-ups once more. It certainly made him feel better than dwelling on all the spirits from his past, now living in front of him. "I suppose putting a sign up would be a bit too helpful," Remus offered with a shrug. To be fair, most families didn't post their names on the mailboxes like Muggles had been wont to do in the past. "It would be a bit of a problem to just start asking around," Sirius sighed. Harry winced and silently thanked them for not yet again pointing out this was something he should have tried to figure out before just walking into the place. Harry winced painfully for that being put so brutally in the forefront, but thankfully the others seemed distracted by the question more than anything. You do know, though, Sirius was quick to point out the problem rather than dwelling on the results. Dumbledore died, but Grimwald Place is still under the Fidelius charm with a bunch of secret keepers. So, unless the caster removed it, he stopped abruptly with a pained look on his face like he was going to be sick, his likely conclusion clear to everyone. The house James and Lily had made their last stand likely may not have even been visible to Harry, as their secret keeper did still live, and had not shared the place with Harry. Better than an alternative holiday, Remus muttered, though the bittersweet idea of Harry having first seen his parents around Christmas in his first year being mirrored in their final resting place here wasn't feeling much better. James' voice caught painfully in his throat, his mind crowding with the image of the last time his son had been in a graveyard and what all had happened there, how he'd never be able to hear of the place again without thinking of a traitor. Harry almost wished he hadn't done it now. His parents in front of him now looking haunted was just no comparison. He tried to reach back for what he'd felt then, to somehow justify to himself how this had been a perfectly reasonable want. But then his dad gave him a clumsy half-hug and tried to promise Harry didn't have to explain anything to them in a voice he was clearly trying to keep from cracking. Can we not use that turn of phrase right now? Sirius muttered to no one in particular. James looked like he was going to be sick. There was something far too permanent about being immortalized in a statue like this, more than any pictures could do to him. Sirius' mind scrambled desperately to distract his best mate and himself from this, and as usual blurted the first thing that came to mind. I'm offended for you prongs. They gave you a statue, but not a bloody chocolate frog card. James gave him a weak little smile in return. There was a jest in him, about the irony he was the one to get such a statue when Sirius far more deserved something like that and would construct one himself. He couldn't get a word out. Sirius gave him a wink anyways, understanding every bit of it and promising they'd compare notoriety later when they could more easily laugh again. Lily almost lost control and darted up the stairs to the crib where her infant was and check again he was still alive, healthy and happy instead of frozen forever in this way. She loved her son, the man he'd become, but there was still some part of her that wished she could take seeing this all away from him. My favorite part of the year, Sirius muttered absently. Remus sniffled for a few moments as he went through all that again, in not only Harry's mind, but his own. How these holidays had always been his favorite for the time he and Sirius spent roaming these empty halls and feeling even more free than the rest of his friends did during the full moon. The teachers giving them more leeway than any other time of year, when he could join in on the adventures of a mysterious night in his own free will. Would that be tainted as well now, with this memory overlapping all the rest? There were many aspects of this that were utterly depressing for a variety of reasons, but one that she noted in a more abstract way was how sad it seemed Harry was the first visitor this place seemed to have in a while. If one were to visit a grave, as surely many in this village had connections to, wouldn't this day be optimal? It was, in some way, a good thing, and left Harry to himself more she supposed. Or a very close one, James muttered. For all they knew, she lived in this very village. It's impolite to shout in a graveyard, Sirius stated, his face devoid of its usual snark and making him just look eerie. Lily shivered more than ever as she kept going. For a moment, Lily had thought her vision had blurred right out of focus, but then she realized Hickory had leaped into her lap and was rubbing his face along the edge of the book in her hand, mewling quietly before doing a little spin and plopping into a warm, purring ball on her lap. She stroked her cat's warm fur and smiled for a moment as he leaned into her touch, murmuring to him before looking up with the smallest of grins at her family. The boys looked half exasperated, half amused her cat had chosen this moment to butt in, but merely adjusted to awkwardly holding the book with one hand so she wouldn't dislodge him as she forced herself to keep going. James rubbed at his chest as he heavily cursed at nothing for a moment. I swear, if Hermione starts pointing out every classmate she spots in there, I'm going to kick her out. I'm just hoping it wasn't a Chang. I can't see how Harry would care about that one, Sirius offered in agreement. James deflated and muttered that was something to catch her attention at least, though everyone else had other priorities. Lily couldn't help but wonder if Dumbledore hadn't spent time avoiding Harry, but instead been open with him at least a year sooner, if not longer, perhaps they would have. In the split second this came to mind, she just as quickly forced her way past it. She was drowning in enough what-ifs without adding to them. Sirius hadn't realized he'd made such a deep noise of distress until Remus rubbed his back in commiseration. His mind wasn't particularly on Dumbledore, though, but his own stray thought twining into existence of he and Harry doing this, or even coming along here by himself. Even thinking of it now was unbearable. He'd never find any peace for what happened to James in such a cold, lifeless place, and he had his best friend right here still. Lily paused and glanced up at her son, seeing his laser-focused gaze on her as if drinking in every detail for the first time. She smiled as she did the same before dragging her eyes back away. No doubt in her this had changed since then. Right, yeah, slipped his mind amidst the Horcrux chats and the conversation over socks, Remus grumbled. James ground his teeth painfully together and nearly tore a few hairs up. He rubbed at them so hard. He was fighting back the urge to rip the book away from Lily and chuck it in the fireplace for as sick as he was feeling, and Hermione constantly doing this was going to push him over. I'd have bloody ignored her, Remus muttered to no one. James shifted restlessly as he completely brushed this off, torn between gratitude Hermione was distracting Harry and wishing she'd never stop. The painful knot that had been building finally reached its peak. No one could stop themselves inching closer to the other, refusing to let a ghost slip in between what Lily was describing. Harry took a deep breath, but no matter how many times he did, he couldn't forget that feeling. His mother and father here now, warm and alive, and doing everything he'd always dreamed in, just talking and looking right at him instead of through him, would never erase his past of when they hadn't this moment. James Potter snorted. Then he coughed and tried to wipe away the snot and tears that had erupted, but he couldn't stop as he looked at Remus. It was not funny, but it was perfect. Why is that there? Harry protested, worried his dad's mind had finally snapped as he watched this reaction. That's not you wouldn't did Death Eaters. Oh, Harry. James threw his arm around his son and fought back a sob. This is something. He couldn't keep going. You can't take everything so literally, son. Harry watched him, desperately trying to understand, his mind pinballing to disassociate this with something he'd heard was Voldemort's goal in life. Then he too looked at Remus. He'd never questioned who had put such a thing there, though his first thought would have been Dumbledore. Something about the last marauder's face, so resembling his father's, gave him his answer. I'm announcing this as my favorite Hermione know-it-all moment, Sirius declared, jabbing his finger so violently into the air to make his point he looked like he was trying to gouge something out of the air. Mine's still the Skeeter Beetle, James argued. Lily didn't bother trying to repress tears anymore either. She let them fall, watching her husband and dearest friends struggling to not do the same in a last-ditch fight to remind themselves this had not yet come to pass, but her son crying just as freely now right in front of her. Her voice chocked several times as she tried to finish, the tang of salt occasionally slipping into her mouth just as unnoticed. In that moment, Harry almost wanted to laugh at himself from an hour ago as he was once again reminded he could always feel worse. HP somehow. The next chapter is still going to be worse. I take personal offense to this paragraph because it marks my entire idea I had of this book. When the last one ended with the trio set on not going back to school, I fully expected to get a wide variety of all new magical locations, each different and rich with detail as J.K. usually provides on their search for places the Horcruxes could be. Godric's Hollow is the only location I got, and it's nothing but depressing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and in fact, I'd probably love this a heck of a lot more if it had been mixed in with other high-flying adventures, and this a calm, bleak middle of why they're doing it all. Instead, nope, just more depressing things after another. If you count Luna's house and Shell Cottage, that's 3 new places they visit total. And I don't count Malfoy's, since all we got to see of that was the dungeon when it could have been really interesting to see where Draco grew up, especially as the book started there. And we could have had some interesting contrast of what the place was like with, and without Voldemort, their murdering Muggle studies teachers. Sigh, guess my imagination ran away with me before I picked this one up. I just remember specifically reading this paragraph and making a face for reminding me of the cold, which I hate, and how I hadn't liked most of what I was reading in a series I so love. I actually have the headcanon this turns into Remus Place. Dumbledore specifically mentioned he had one in Garth, and while it's just as likely it could have been Lupin's parents' place, I like this better. I know many people always thought the Potters lived in Godric's Hollow their whole short, adult life, but I just never favored that, never even entertained it before I saw everyone else saying it. This is a major plot hole I don't see a lot of people talk about. The obvious solution is Peter removed the charm and let the place be open again as he went off to live life as a rat. But why would he? There's no reason to. It's said that Dumbledore put some sort of charm up to let him know something had happened there, which is why Hagrid was there that same night. But why could he get in? It's possible that the magic that blasted Voldemort out of his body from the rebound curse was so powerful it lifted away the Fidelius charm and basically every bit of magic in the area. But yeah, bothered me a bit it's never directly mentioned. For the longest time, I thought this meant the gate was decoratively in the shape of lips for some reason, and it wasn't until I started taking equestrian classes did I learn this was a special type of gate around livestock. Random fun fact for the day, if you didn't know. Sorry for rambling a bit this chapter, I warned you in advance. Chapter 17, Bathilda's Secret. Chapter text. This chapter title also annoys me, because it's not really Bathilda's secret, which isn't revealed until the next chapter, but Nagini's. But obviously you couldn't use that chapter title, because it would give it away. Is now a good time to bring up James once again found the chapter where he not only gets to learn of Bathilda's death, but a first-hand account of his and Lily's. No. Okay, I'll go away now. HP. James' face still felt aflame with emotions he refused to acknowledge. He was not dead, and he'd never let his son live through something like that again if he could help it. He'd remind him every second he could. He took the book from Lily and ignored how his hand shook. He took to his chapter and pretended his voice didn't crack with emotion. He kept going. Well, there is a reason we never used prongs as lookout. Awful eyesight, Sirius muttered, but was ignored and glad for it. James was laser-focused on this threat. If Hermione was in fact right again, and his son was about to be descended on by Death Eaters who were staking out this place. Lily nodded eagerly in agreement to this idea while tightening her own arm around her son, fighting off the impulse to do the same. She's got you there. Why did you bother disguising yourselves again? Remus muttered without even realizing he'd let the stray thought out, attention on nothing else, but how Harry was going to get out of this one. They could just apparate away again, or thankfully James still wasn't paying attention to anything else, but what the answer actually was. Some really powerful ones can, like Myrtle with her toilet water. Lily quickly disagreed, in a last vain hope her son wasn't about to be in a fight for his life. James tried to give her a shaky smile to show he hoped the same, but none of them really believed it. Crookshanks is back, Sirius tried to ask. Or Hickory, Lily offered with a half-hearted giggle. He's got her there, Remus quickly agreed. If a Death Eater suspected for a second those muggles were Harry Potter, they'd already be dead without caring otherwise what the answer was. Being surrounded by strangers and all those casualties. Sirius yelped in concern. Bloody hell, Harry, just apparate away already. We still needed to find Bathilda Bagshot's house, Harry protested. It would be even riskier to start making repeat trips there. James sighed, but couldn't disagree his son was right. It was better to get everything they came for at once. James startled again and looked to Harry to see what that meant. His eyes were bright. He had the smallest of smiles on his face, even as he looked a bit conflicted over excitement and further melancholy for all this place meant to him. James cautiously went back to the book to see what else Harry had come across. James's voice broke over the passing mention of this again. He'd lost count of how often this had been brought up, but was still never prepared for the brutal soul-crushing feeling it presented every time. James' breath was coming out in short, sharp, panting little gasps by the end. He hadn't been able to stop this. He hadn't been able to save his wife and child from experiencing any of this. There was no consolation to be had from this living nightmare he was reading about, and he wouldn't let anyone try. I can't imagine why they would, Lily murmured, hands clasped painfully together in front of her. The horror that must echo from that place, she couldn't imagine visiting it now at just the thought, let alone living in the actual shell of what was once a home. James gave himself a little shake and tried to read this with enthusiasm again. This was new at least, something of interest to see. James couldn't help it in the end and finally started crying. Shoulders shaking, throat choking. It was just one time too many for him, and with such a sweet sentiment on top. I know prongs. It's all right, love, let it out. Harry watched miserably as his father was comforted with no way of his own to help. The reality of it all had struck his family many times, even before he'd been awake to see the first time. How much longer could they stand to go through this? Even as James managed to collect himself again, Remus and Sirius didn't move back away. They stayed sitting on the table in front of him, Lily wiggling a bit to be more comfortable on the arm of the sofa. He even flashed Hickory a smile, who still remained stubbornly in Lily's lap. Then he threw an arm out and dragged Harry closer, keeping him pinned there as he forged on. Sirius made a broken sort of noise that was a fair attempt at a laugh. Is that all they could come up with? Surely if you were going to put your mark on something, you'd be far more memorable about it. Not even Prongs has your flair for that kind of art, Padfoot, Remus chuckled. Hermione's really missing the big picture there, Lily sighed, mind flashing to Ron, and if he'd ever visited this site, if he'd doodled something on there long ago with no idea of what his future would hold. There was far less excitement in James now at this new thing. He was weary once more. Even if he had temporarily forgotten the fear there was someone near Harry, it was back with a vengeance now. Sirius finally said into the lingering silence following this description. Why, thank you, Sirius, James said without looking up. I hadn't realized. No, nope, absolutely not, Lily shivered. I don't like this, Harry. I don't either, he slowly agreed. Doesn't feel like I have much of a choice, though, he still said, rubbing painfully at his chest in what he only hoped were remembered nerves. We came there with a purpose. James grit his teeth to stop himself saying that purpose wasn't to die. There is no way in hell that's baffled a Bagshot, and she knew to come fetch you, Remus protested. I can't say I like any other options of what's going on, Sirius said, shifting uneasily in place for that fight they were all still expecting, here of all places. Dumbledore didn't exclusively make friends with people who gave off his vibe. Remus groaned. Harry, I very much dislike every part of this. So you've all said, Harry agreed. Can't help me taking it back, though, as some part of him was really telling him he wished he could. Because there's no way she could be lying about that. James groaned. What exactly would you have done if she hadn't agreed? Sirius asked. Dragged her along anyways, stood there and argued with her. Harry merely shrugged, thankful he hadn't had to find out. James shivered at the idea, every impulse in him telling him to run from this. He had not met Bathilda Bagshot, yet apparently he didn't at all like how mysterious she was being about all of this, as if Harry didn't have enough mysteries in his life. Everybody knows what you look like anyways, Harry, Remus reminded. So if she has some way of knowing you're around, that's really not the point. Lily began nibbling on her lip as she tried to understand this lady. Apparently she'd been quite the little chatterbox, going from the letter she'd once sent Sirius. Now she wouldn't speak a word. Had something happened to her too in the 16 years in between? I don't think it would really fear that, Sirius disagreed. The diary called the basilisk right to it after all. Great timing, Sirius. James grumbled. He didn't need to be reminded of such a terrifying event in Harry's life right now when this one was making him so uneasy. Oh, so she's rude on top of everything. James muttered, like Lily finding it harder to believe by the second they let such an odd person in their life during such an unstable time. Since when has the size of a person ever convinced you that has to do with their magic? Remus asked in surprise. She could hardly walk about her own house. I doubted we'd have much more issue drawing our wands before her too, Harry shrugged. This is not that, Sirius said with confidence. He didn't know what this was, but all of them were sitting on the edge of their seat for what should have been an almost welcome home visit to Harry. This did not feel right. Harry shifted uncomfortably at this honest truth being thrust in his face. The elderly, even in wizards, Dumbledore, and even Ginny's, Auntie Muriel had given the impression age would only give more sharp wit. He had little to no experience with any others, and neither did anyone around him really by the looks of it. This sight and these thoughts was even starting to make him feel uneasy. He couldn't hold on to this air of reassurance much longer. James was possibly the closest to also witnessing this, but even his parents weren't that far on in age. They weren't fully functional. None of them liked the idea of someone falling so far, when the four of them hadn't even been given the chance to live a full life. Oh, wow. Lily startled in surprise. Well, if nothing else, when you leave there in just a second, you learn something important, James offered hopefully. I can't believe Skeeter actually is something in that book I want to know about, Sirius muttered, face scrunched up at the idea. In unsavory methods, I'm guessing, Remus said uneasily. The awful idea struck him. If Skeeter had actually done this to Bathilda, delving so deep into her memories, it had such drastic effects on someone. He wouldn't put it past her. If it were true, he wished another Lockhart-like fate on the beetle. Lily's skin was starting to crawl with worry. This wasn't just rude anymore, this was downright wrong. By no account was Bathilda Bagshot a pureblood nut, nor would she even know Hermione was a muggle-born, but there was little to no other explanation why she was focused so purely on Harry. Was she under an enchantment and working for Voldemort against her will? I'd love to. Sirius quickly agreed, though he doubted this was really a suggestion for them to leave after asking two questions. Why had she told them to follow her for then? At least her hearing's still spot on. James gave an awkward laugh that died quickly. I can't say that's the encouraging part right now, Lily stated, to which no one disagreed. I'm not sure who else there is to ask, Remus said, unless you plan on tracking down Skeeter next. Ah, don't even joke about that, Moony. James huffed. They already had enough bad walks down Harry's memory lane. Oh, now she'll talk to you, Sirius blustered. Did she really get rules from Dumbledore about not talking to strangers? Harry didn't answer. His heart was starting to pound uncomfortably in his chest, the ghost of adrenaline trying to dump into his system too early. Something was very wrong, but still he could not imagine what. Great, that Locket can join the club, Remus whispered. James went white in shock. Lily startled right out of her spot and crashed onto the floor, springing up in the same step, wand in hand, not at all caring for the scratch marks left behind as he cat fled the room. What the hell is that thing? Sirius shouted so loud Harry clapped his hands over his ears. Not human, Remus agreed in opposition, so quiet no one did hear him. This was magic beyond them. Who or what Harry was in the presence of they had not a single idea, but one thing was crystal clear. Harry needed to get out of there now. Harry, Lily screeched in his ear in concern, was the place making him apathetic? The same bloody thing that's been happening to you for years now, a warning you've had more than enough practice tuning into. Harry wanted to get defensive, say he'd been pretty distracted by having answers dangled in front of him, but finally agreed he'd been ignoring some obvious warning signs by now. At least you are on guard, Sirius agreed, voice now a bit hoarse himself and not even noticing. James hardly managed to finish that before the visual snapped him up, and he screamed. He threw the book away from him and startled right out of his seat, skin itching all over. There was a moment of frozen silence for the horror to creep in, before Harry lunged for the book, his mind in a dizzy maze, torn between seeing the shock and disgust on them all and fighting off a snake that wasn't really here. Hermione. Yes, she can. Sirius, voice cut off. He didn't even know where he was going with it. There wasn't much of a plan in his own head except screaming and running to get Harry away from that thing, the book and the snake. There was something there, a small, swift pain in Harry of worse to come, but it was so brief it got lost in the midst of the pain he was suffering through now, in the chaos and horror of fighting off such a monster. What a lovely present, escaping death and all. James finally breathed again, his skin slightly blue, tinged around the edges from having held his breath so long after his initial reaction. Harry didn't really react, so James clumsily made his way over to him while trying to pull himself back together again after all this collective trauma. He wasn't sure how effective it was. His presence didn't seem to be doing Harry any good anymore. His son still remained frozen in place when he reached him and gently tried to take the book back, a bit embarrassed by his freak out, but quickly forgetting it in the face of what he was seeing. Harry's eyes were unfocused. He was swallowing convulsively and looked as likely to be sick as to pass out any second. Come on, son, you got away from that snake. It'll probably give me nightmares as much as the chamber did. He coaxed a reaction out, but still Harry seemed beyond words, Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. He gently led him back to his seat, and Lily tried as well for him to look at her, but there was an absence of anything in his green eyes. The two shared a look of pure fear, more than anything in his past had yet done to them, as panic began to set in if he'd finally driven himself too far in his memories. Not now, when they were so close. Remus was already halfway to the kitchen to get him the potion to relax when Harry whimpered. It was only the slightest sound of life, but something showing their boy was still in there. James, keep going. He hadn't needed the prompting from Sirius, as he delved recklessly back in for several lines to get his son out of this. Then his voice tapered off as he realized what Voldemort was dragging his son into. A memory that his son had only glimpsed through the horrors of his past, one that had been surrounding them, pressing in and suffocating from all sides for the past hour. "Oh," was the tiny, broken little word that creeped out of him. Tears burning in his eyes once more, he didn't give himself a second to prepare what he was going to be forced to live through one more time, or a dozen more times. It didn't matter. Harry needed them to finally live this memory with him to the fullest. A broken sob escaped from Lily as she wrapped herself tighter around Harry. The fact that Voldemort had even a second of mercy for another on this night, no matter his reason. James only managed to read through gritted teeth and hellish fury. The betrayal and consequences finally side by side, the pain only fueling him to immerse in every detail as vividly as his son as being forced to, learn from every second of it, and never have it be known again. Lily recoiled in disgust at such a moment in their life being looked in on by that thing. That perverse, tyrannical monster getting to witness their last happy moments in a game they both loved as much as their infant for the simple joy it brought them. A fire lit within her. For a moment she was so filled with this fury of him seeing this, she was convinced the words would change before her husband's eyes, and he would vividly describe Voldemort's eyes being burned from his skull. James froze. A look of horror etched so deeply into his face Sirius realized he was seeing his last moment in real life and couldn't breathe past it himself. All the fight drained out of him as he looked to his wife and child, but no apology in the world could be equal to this atrocity. I didn't have my. The words were nonsensical, meaningless. He had his wand on him now as he did at all times, but when he'd heard his front door being blasted open, it had somehow slipped his mind. Prongs. James, look at me. Sirius had a painfully tight hold on him, but still he could not concentrate on anything, stuck on this complete failure on his part. If ever he'd let himself dwell long enough on this matter to think up to his last breath, it was of a curse of his own, a fight in him that had never failed but this one crucial moment. Hey, listen. Hearing this through that twisted mind doesn't change a single solitary fact that you gave them a chance. James looked desperately at him, willing that to be true and not a lie he'd been telling himself from day one. James, he looked desperately to his wife, the love of his life for as long as he could remember now. To his amazement, she smiled. She knew what was coming next, had already known when this began what her final words were, and did not regret them for 1 second. I love you. He repeated it back to her, at a loss for his own words in anything but this. This didn't stop Remus and Sirius for being beside themselves with guilt, for feeling they had a hand in Prong's death as much as Voldemort in that moment, for constantly barging into his house without a care, for not trusting each other when it mattered most, and in turn James believing in the friend that got him killed. James had died for their mistakes, not his own. James' mouth was dry, picturing the moment in his mind, no matter how hard he clung to the image of Lily fleeing behind him in gratitude. It didn't erase the hurt he still felt, that her life would not be the only one he feared at that moment, and it wasn't his own either. He somehow knew that his last thought was of Lily getting away, not just because of what he tried to do, but because something had happened to Peter. He would have been fearing for his friend's life, and what had happened to him for this to come about, and died never knowing why. Lily's heart was thundering painfully in her chest, to be mocked by Voldemort, even now for this. She'd be well aware in those last moments, intimately and painfully acknowledging who was to blame for this happening, and it wouldn't stop her for 1 second from knowing who she would always think of first. No matter how many times he'd been forced to hear it through Harry's memories around Dementors, nothing in the world would ever make the blow of that lesson. Even if he lived 1,000 years, He could never take a single one for granted with his beloved wife. Through everything, no matter what else happened from now until this very moment, both parents still stood firm with righteous fury that it had not worked. They'd do it all again. James stopped. He finally stopped and just breathed, but refused to let the world crash around him for having to live through that again as he looked at his son. He was still out of it, drenched in sweat, and now breathing erratically, making disjointed noises of intense pain and crude delight. It was as if his head had finally split in two, and it was terrifying. Lily conjured a hand towel and began wiping the worst of it from his eyes, while James rubbed his back and promised that part was over, saying his name again and again to remind him where he was really supposed to be. As he slowly came out of his trance, he still muttered a few strings of nonsense which they only understood half of. Hermione got away orphanage won the Horcruxes always, until finally those trailed off too, and he was blinking slowly about at all of their gaunt faces. He didn't need to ask if what had just gone through his head was real or not, or even if they'd just learned of it with him. He wished he could apologize for yet again being a link, a direct line into the worst of their life, and always bringing them back to showing this in their future. But the worry he knew was not for themselves, but him. "I'm all right," he finally croaked, trying to sit up more properly and ignoring the vertigo that poured over him. "Right, and I turn into a cat," James sighed, brushing at his hair, unsure what his own face held now, but Harry still seemed to draw comfort from whatever it was. "Just breathe, son. We're getting through this. We'll stop for the night very soon." Harry wished that they could just stop here and now, that he could close his eyes and open them again to find no one else he ever cared about had to suffer through him. But finally, he just nodded and urged his dad to finish this. Harry glanced around with an uneasy expression, clearly unsure if he wanted an answer to this. "You were." Sirius wasn't sure he had words for the expression lodged into Harry's face. If it had been the same, or somehow even worse under Hermione's care for hours, he could only imagine how she'd handled that. "Unwell," Lily finally finished, brushing her hand along his still damp brow. Lily reflexively covered the spot with horror, and once again thanked the heavens for Hermione's preparedness in at least this aspect. She'd known they'd be coming into contact with Nagini and her unique venom again, and likely either would have asked Arthur or just found out for herself what had been used to close the previously difficult wound. "You shouldn't blame yourself for that, Harry." Remus was quick to soothe away that nerve, not wanting this memory to be the only remark on a place that meant so much to him. "What you really did there, you needed that in your life." Harry hesitated for only a moment before nodding slowly in agreement to him. He had a very odd feeling that he visited the place again with more than Hermione, but couldn't imagine who or why the feeling would be trying to float up now. James wretched again, having in no way forgotten that twisted bit of magic in everything else that happened even if it had been pushed away slightly. He'd never particularly had anything against snakes as a species before these books, but he really might now because of what they kept doing to his son's life. "Shared sentiments," Sirius promised. "I didn't mean this." Remus spluttered painfully at his name being resurrected right now. He'd actually gone quite a few moments without worrying about his own child, but the reminder now brought it all painfully back to the forefront of what that infant would be going through. A father who could do nothing to save the wife and child, a condemned mother for loving her infant, a fate similar to Harry's surely. "I wish I didn't," James agreed. In a vain attempt to change the subject for even a second, Sirius tried for a second to laugh. It sounded deranged. "Why are you calling him you-know-who still? What with he cut off abruptly, his plan ending at once as reminding Harry of Ron helped nothing. Harry didn't answer anyways. They hadn't thought it was possible for him to grow paler until he did. "I honestly want to find it a good thing neither of you had the first thought to use the killing curse," Lily offered half-heartedly. "Good priorities, though, getting out of there," James whispered, mind still a swirling mess of it all. He tried to think of something else, but he just kept circling back to it, and now feared Harry always would as well. Could his son ever face Voldemort without his scar burning and incapacitating him from the fight? Would he forever be trapped in Voldemort's mind while trying to kill him? What would that do to his own if he'd ever gotten the chance? He shivered with the unknown and found even these bleak words to be of better distraction. All five of them muttered in pure discomfort. Why wouldn't Hermione answer? The simplistic explanation was still awful, that it had somehow been left behind in the battle, and now Harry's wand would either have to rest in those ruins, or they'd have to make yet another trip back to get it. Both options were terrible in their own right. Harry gaped at his father, the feeling in him of something being irreparably broken nearly shattering him all over again. It was impossible. It couldn't be. His wand, a connection to Voldemort he actually valued not only because of how it saved his life, but because of everything it meant to him, linking him to the magical world. But wait, it really could not be. He stuffed his hand in his pocket and came up with the same wand he did from his memory. Smooth holly still warm to the touch. Though the phoenix feather was not visible, he knew it to be there. He could feel the warmth of Fawkes in him still. He looked to them for some kind of explanation, but already knew before he saw all the confused stares they had no more idea than him. It should have been impossible, but then, so should Harry being here at all. Instead of putting it back away, he held it carefully in his hand, more fragile than spun glass, as if fearing putting it back out of sight would sever it once more. "Oh, Harry," Lily sighed. She didn't need to tell him. He knew if she could, she would. Ron's wand had already been an example in Harry's life. He knew the real answer. She saved his life, Sirius said stoutly. And you know, obviously, it all works out. Harry was glad they could at least keep up confidence because they knew otherwise, but it didn't erase the feeling inside him of remembering seeing this. First Hedwig, now this. How much more could he stand to lose before he lost himself? For a brief second, Harry wondered why he felt distracted by that, almost joyful at the mention of someone he'd refused to acknowledge for over a month. It was the first time Ron's name had been mentioned since, well, abandoning them, but he was so focused on not digging into his memories so soon after getting lost in them mere moments ago. He pushed it all far away from his consciousness. "I'm glad that didn't seem to be a lasting issue," James said slowly, but with no more idea how his son had ended up here with the same wand perfectly intact. James finally closed his chapter, his usually animated life almost mummified. "I think we should stop for the night," Lily croaked. "I can't take any more of this." Harry held his hand out for the book and stroked his hand along the spine for a few moments before turning pleading eyes on them. Just a few more. I know." He tried to put into words the fierce joy that had seized him for even a moment. Maybe he got his wand fixed very soon, or he got some happier, friendlier news. Maybe there was finally just an answer instead of more misery on the horizon, but he couldn't stand lying in a bed with so much left unanswered. It doesn't stay like this forever. He had to believe that. He hadn't left his time with so much unsaid. His parents were beyond exhausted. Remus and Sirius were as likely as Hickory to curl into balls where they sat and sleep for 12 hours. But all four knew they could never deny Harry this. They would keep going as long as he needed them to. HP. Well, this was an appropriately soul-crushing chapter, just in time for Valentine's Day. Asterisk of all the moments in this series, I've thought about this one longest of all. Excuse me. They didn't have their wands on them when someone busted the front door open. I impulse grab my phone every time I get off my bed. I'd sure as hell have it on me as a method of defense, and especially offense, if I heard anything come in my front door. The series provided some detail of how this went down, and I'd proceeded to fill in the blanks for years. But my own headcanon didn't involve them, just not grabbing them. For crying out loud, Voldemort himself complimented, he put up a courageous fight. Which means JK did initially as well intend there to actually be a fight, not just a snip, dead walk away. So I devised up what I did, and even gave an example of it happening in the 5th book. Not as full proof. They were obviously more on edge being in their house with secret Harry there, but no Fidelius charm up. But it's simply Lily and James' security in their friends. The faith that no one entered their house that they didn't trust. Obviously being hidden so deeply, only one of their very best friends knew about it, meant they could be even more lax. Okay, so it still kind of bothers me, but I hope you enjoyed anyways. Chapter 18. The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. Chapter text. I am halfway done. There are 18 chapters left. I am freaking out. HP Sirius gently took the book from Harry, managing a genuine smile for his godson as he did so. There were dark circles under his eyes, his voice still croaky with emotion, but none of that would ever stop him from being there like Harry needed. He had to clear his throat several times and still couldn't start the next part, entirely erasing the heavy layer of chill smothering them all. A pretty picture, James scoffed. I've found better, he grinned at his wife, who returned the smile. I'd be very concerned by that if I didn't know what had happened. Remus couldn't help but snort in amusement at the reminder anyways. Just before that, he had it broken by a rogue bludger, Sirius recalled. And later that year, he got a basilisk fang stabbed into it, James remembered with disgust. Not to mention all the other times you've been injured that had nothing to do with that particular arm, Lily sighed, noting the scars on the back of this hand anyways. Well, she's not wrong, Lily agreed. The bond was still forged. No one should ever deny a connection one has with their wand. I'm sure some days Ron even still misses his old wand from Charlie, Sirius agreed, wincing at saying such a thing aloud as Harry flinched. Every parent always wants to claim their kid is special. James laughed, still a rather awkward and forced kind of noise for their atmosphere. Mine actually is. He sounded as boastful as he meant to. It almost came off perfectly natural. Your first snitch? Sirius asked, clearly aghast. Harry, I'd frame that. He could only put up a bleak smile. His family's praise over such a long-ago accomplishment didn't erase all the vile he felt, but it helped. Why would a photo of him be any different than a memory of him? Lily asked in surprise. Harry, you've done nothing wrong. She couldn't stand to sit here and listen to his sorrows without offering something, but none of them had much real comfort to this. They felt much the same. In their time, he might not even know of the Horcruxes yet, but that did not excuse the way he was treating Harry. There felt little to no excuse for any of this mess he'd left to their boy alone. He's not Lockhart, Remus huffed. Does Hermione just make books magically appear to her now? Lily yelped. I can't believe she's just been wandering around with it the whole time. It wasn't even out during the summer, James recalled. Where how? There were some general mutters of understanding. Remus even got a slight chuckle out of it. Of all the things for Hermione to take notice of in that place, it would be the book. Sirius and Remus exchanged a deeply uneasy look. They weren't even sure they wanted to know everything anymore. It seemed the more they learned, the more confusing everything got. Something we've never forgotten. James did get a laugh out of that. She's been saving your bacon since before you were even officially friends, Sirius reminisced. Sirius let his jaw hang open for several moments after finishing that before he could drag his eyes away from the word. The name, the last name of a notorious wizard who was once Albus Dumbledore's friend. James gave an awkward laugh, rubbing his neck with even more discomfort than before, though at least this time someone's past didn't have anything to directly do with him, so he was less likely to burst into tears. I guess there was a good reason Dumbledore never talked about his life. Grindelwald never went to Hogwarts, nor did he live here as far as I knew, Lily said in surprise. Where did they even meet to be friends? I'm wondering if Doge was friends with him too, Remus frowned. I find it hard to believe he never mentioned such a thing, some sort of meet-up in a village being blown out of proportion by Skeeter. Wouldn't, Harry bitterly reminded of the wedding. How hard he tried to make it seem Dumbledore had never so much as told off a first year he was such a saint. Sirius shifted uncomfortably for a few moments, his mind lingering on friends he wished he'd never met in his past more than he'd like to admit. Had something similar happened here? He finally managed to get through the chapter, taking everything in Skeeter's view with the same level of trust he would as if his mother was telling this story. Sirius found himself out of material to read concerning that, but still with the same amount of questions he'd started with. Whatever happened to Hermione imprisoning her in a jar as the beetle she is, I think we need to revisit that idea. How can Skeeter ever get any credibility? Remus scoffed. She herself said in there, several times, she had to pull all this together to create her own story. You can't deny, Harry began hotly. I'm not, Remus quickly agreed, looking rather sick at all the implications before them. What Dumbledore wrote to Grindelwald was not pleasant, but it doesn't mean I have to judge him for it. Not until I hear his account of why he said it. Harry chewed on his tongue to stop himself arguing with them. He didn't want to hear excuses to what Dumbledore had done, but Remus had only said he wanted to know more, which Harry still did as well. I don't buy any of that anyways, no matter what was exaggerated. Sirius sneered. Dumbledore just letting someone walk off after possibly murdering his sister. Going about, even for 2 months, acting like my parents and thinking he was better than everyone and had a right to rule them. No, it's all Skeeter's usual dung. We're still not being told something. The only interesting thing I got out of that, James sighed, was that Bathilda Bagshot was related to Gellert Grindelwald. Knew being a pureblood could make it a small world, but Merlin's genes, this is getting hilarious. Guess we finally know what Lily was going to say in her letter. That he and Dumbledore were once friends, Lily asked. I did find that plenty surprising, but if she was so tight-lipped about it, Skeeter had to use all these tricks to get it out of her. Why was she going around just telling people like us? It could still have been something else. Despite all they'd heard, they couldn't keep going on about this. Unlike Harry's life, which they'd been given the gift to learn intermittently about with him there, it still felt indecent to be digging into Dumbledore's life like this without his knowledge. His connection with Harry was one they did want to have a word with him about, but everything he'd done in his past, before he became their headmaster, none of them could judge. When they'd all done plenty themselves, they wished they never had. Wish she'd thought of that in the first place. Sirius scowled. What had been her goal again, sharing that with Harry? True, if she'd read it first and hid it from him, that would have been worse. But really, what was the point of acknowledging anything Skeeter wrote about? Harry shifted with guilt and wished he could apologize for all the tight faces at again, reminding them of all this. They'd all experienced the reality Dumbledore was not a saint who could do anything with the swish of a wand. But here was the brutal fact he was just as human as they were with his own mistakes. And the last thing Harry needed in this quest, where he was already in such a rut, was more misery. She also once got quotes from half the Slytherin common room, James said. I don't care what facts were planted in there, it's not the source. The real question is, if Harry's ever going to get that. Remus sighed, rather sick of everything that had happened today, felt like a circle. That's like saying Voldemort got his idea from Slughorn. James protested hotly. They're already evil scums with ideas. Just because they branch out and get other opinions doesn't mean blame should be shared. Harry wasn't so sure, but he also held tight to the last nugget in him that tried to understand why he did not detest Dumbledore. Was it because he still had gaps in his memories, leaving these soft spots, or something new he still learned? Karma, Sirius said with Chipper, trying not to imagine the place like another Azkaban in its evil. Lily winced for how harsh Harry was coming across, even while not trying. It wasn't good for him to constantly be thinking on nothing but all these awful things, and she worried more every minute what he would have been like had he showed up here with his memories intact. How distant and absent from this world he would have been, torn away from all of this with no answers in sight. Even now she was watching him sink lower into himself with every passing line, and she wished desperately to help any way she could. I can't believe that, Sirius stated with certainty. There's something we're missing about that girl. We've heard too many rumors with no proof of any of it. Had a hand in those types of things, having generated a few himself in school to deter people from getting too close to Moony's secrets. Give them a drop, and they'd create their whole ocean. Please, Harry, at least think on that, Lily agreed, a pleading note in her voice. Harry looked somberly at her for a few moments before nodding. I know, I feel like, he finished by waving at the book with no real way to express where his anger was stemming from. It would only be another blow to his parents. He'd been right. All four looked as heavy as he felt, lost and confused for why a man they thought they knew so well could do this to someone they loved so much. Harry deserved so much more than being left like this, again. That was getting harder to argue the longer this dragged on. Sirius wished he could tell Harry with nothing, but the truth there would always be someone who loved him, would help care for him, and be there when needed. But that was all slipping away faster, every word. Sirius finished his chapter near tears again. How many times could they be reminded of how alone Harry was before they all snapped? HP. If Hermione and Harry could get through a whole chapter without commentating on it, I figured these guys could as well. Sorry this was such a short chapter, but come on, the bulk of it was a chapter of another book in this book. I just can't come up with too much to say outside of Rita's a liar. We should take everything we just heard with a grain of salt, and it's really nothing we haven't already heard implied before now, moving on. Repetitively. for the entire section that I cut out. Trust me, the missing mirror will be so much more interesting than yet another bloody filler chapter. I'm halfway through, guys. Is anyone else screaming because I'm screaming? Chapter 19. The Silver Doe. Chapter text. Harry looked around at all of their heavy-lidded eyes and tightly drawn faces. He could feel the worry and see how much they were all being affected by this as surely as he could look out the window to see the chilly late-night air. They should stop for the night. He knew they all wanted to, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He needed some clear-cut path in his mind to ever believe he could even nod off, and was determined to get it as he took the book from Sirius and tried to start his chapter with enough energy for all of them. Sounds almost lovely, if you don't know who Nagini is, Sirius offered. For the first time in ages, Harry actually felt himself be interested in something again. There was a rekindling, a feeling was back that he knew there was more significance to that than he was quite remembering. His excitement wasn't quite as infectious as he'd hoped. The others exchanged worried looks. Voldemort had his Death Eaters out looking for Harry, and they were getting close again, only hindered by the magical protection they kept around them. I swear that woman is incapable of doing anything else in her free time, James said, with a bit of concern for her health. Would you rather her setting off dung bombs when Harry thinks he hears someone else around? Lily demanded. It doesn't even have to be that, he shrugged. Playing a game of chess with yourself, drawing in the snow, Merlin I take writing her own book rather than rereading one. I'll bet she's read books on all of that, if it's any conciliation, Harry chuckled. Now Harry was starting to question what that euphoria had been. Was he really so excited for a fight? There was no way both he and Hermione were imagining this. Was it possible they were both so desperate for a change in these dreary days? I wonder if Dean knows he has a whole forest named after him, Sirius chuckled. I'll bet he takes Seamus out there regularly and brags about it, Remus assured. Haven't heard about those in a while, Lily grinned. Reminds me of better times, like when your biggest worry was Devil's Snare and setting Snape on fire, James smirked. Helps to keep off anyone's nearby radar, Remus agreed tactically. Assuming they still allow such things as holidays, Sirius grumbled. Right, thanks again McGonagall for the experience, James sighed. Your instincts are rarely ever wrong, Lily whispered. Harry's every move indicated they all needed to be on edge. He didn't look frightened though, just weary, like he knew something was coming but couldn't yet declare if it had been good or bad. You're terrible at this guard duty thing, Sirius happily informed him. Harry resisted the urge to say he was as good as Mr. Weasley, considering the end results of that. So, could you? James asked weakly. He wasn't sure he could stomach another fight to the death with his son, narrowly escaping again so soon after the last traumatizing one. Harry didn't answer anyways. He finally had that feeling back, the burn of curiosity in trying to think what happened next without torturing his mind to learn it sooner than he should. Please be a Veela, please be a Veela, Sirius began muttering, eyes painfully wide in fright for it being anything else more dangerous. It's a Patronus, was the only thing Lily could think to whisper as all eyes fell on her. Thank you, dear, James told her, the look in his eyes almost frightening with intensity. His mind was going through ideas of this and discarding them all so fast it would have been impossible for any other person to keep up. Nobody else could think of a thing to say. Aside from Voldemort waving a white flag in surrender, this was the very last thing any of them would have ever expected to appear. Prongs had once rode again to save Harry's life. Had his mother now somehow done the same? The moment of wonder was instantly doused with fear of the unknown. That thing's enchanting you, Sirius shrieked. Harry's fine, he'll be fine. James was quick to stutter just to keep himself calm. He's fought off the Imperious Curse before. He'll snap out of this in no time. Lily tried to convince herself of the same, but they weren't even sure what this thing was. Only a Patronus, only one person's Patronus, should have caused such a reaction in Harry, and she was no more there for her son than her husband. While it was true 2 people could have the same animal, there just seemed to be no person alive whom this could be attached to, so it must be something they didn't even recognize. A magical creature, possibly something similar to a boggart that was luring him in. Harry frowned at them all sadly that their first impression was to be afraid of this, when he still felt the same he had in that forest. In the past, his memories had clouded him, though, and some sense within him told him danger was on the horizon, just not associated with this doe. It was all very confusing as usual, so he kept going as calmly as ever. Oh, great. Harry's going to die. Remus groaned, watching him now like he expected a ghost to take his place any second. Lily cuffed him on the head as well, but they were all more afraid than angry at what was compelling him to do this. Instinct, powerful magic, or something else entirely. They did not like he was doing it alone. You can't have an answer to the question you didn't even ask. Sirius sighed. He didn't care if that was Merlin reanimated as this deer. As far as they knew, Harry had not done anything to invoke this happening to him, which meant it was being done to him. Hadn't he had enough of that? Lily squeezed his arm painfully tight. The urge to hold her own question in nearly overpowered in light of the circumstances he was in, but then Harry stopped anyways to smile at her. A warmth she just couldn't believe meant anything bad was coming, and he still looked at this memory with some fondness associated with her. So she encouraged, "What were you going to ask?" "Mom." He said it now as a simple fact. The question had already been answered for him. She nodded and squeezed his arm again to reassure as he went on. Harry couldn't help but linger over that line for longer than a pause of breath. He'd never been gifted such a thing outside of danger before he landed here, and he swore he would never spend enough time now taking in that feeling. James was fighting back the urge to pull Harry into a headlock and not release him until he was out of this foolhardy danger he'd gotten himself led into. He couldn't even be that mad, but he was worried sick. There was a pause, where Harry gave himself the time to really acknowledge what he'd just told himself, the flood of emotions he felt both past and yet understood for this thing being dumped back into his life like this. Then he looked up and saw the outrage on the rest of his family. Sirius was already in full swing while he'd been collecting himself. Is the matter with that madman? In what world would Harry ever come to this place, that Hermione just so happened to visit once in her life, to leave a sword there? That magical guardian, whatever thing probably couldn't appear to Harry and just take him there, James grumbled. They still weren't entirely sure what that had been. A patroness was the obvious answer, but it just tied too well to Harry specifically to not rule out some other magical means. So I'm with Sirius. Why was Dumbledore thinking Harry would go to this forest in the first place for this to happen? I don't know, and I'm getting really sick of saying that, Remus sighed. Lily at least squeezed her son's arm again, the smallest of smiles on her face. She was just as annoyed as them for the seeming random occurrence of all this. It only made the rest of what Harry was going through seem even more impossible if he was just supposed to stumble his way into everything. But finally, they had the next piece. A very important weapon, and that locket could be vanquished once and for all. If they never knew the reason of why it had been put there, she still tried to be happy it was. Could be all of those reasons at once, or none of them. James threw his hands up in exasperation. Who the bloody hell knows any more with this mess? Harry flinched even as his dad's sharp tone wasn't directed at him. He knew they weren't blaming him, but he still felt like it was his fault. It could still be another fake. This could all be a trick, Remus cautioned. No one else knows they're after it, or why, Sirius reminded, weary as well but very much wanting this to be true. Just an easy answer in front of him for once, if not a simple one. I'd be even more suspicious if it had, Lily agreed. Maybe you have to actually need help. James chuckled at Harry. Why do you think it's going to be a challenge? I'm sure all you have to do is take the sword out by hand. If whatever magic's keeping it in there is connected to you, that'll be good enough. It might even not be working because it's not your wand, Remus added. Just, please don't summon a basilisk or something to try and recreate this, Sirius shivered. Ah, Harry, why are you making such a big deal out of this? Sirius groaned. Dumbledore didn't have to go through some special process when you gave it to him. I guess by this point I didn't expect anything to be so easy, Harry offered. It had made perfect sense in his head at the time. He'd had no reason to try anything else. Harry paused for a moment to grin back at the memory this invoked, both in here and his first moment seeing the hat. A time of wonder on his first night in the castle, and the simple moment of watching his family all laugh at Remus for not wanting to sing that very line his first morning here. Gryffindor had always meant so much to him, he'd never forget that. Oh, you're not, Lily muttered. Yes, yes, he is, James sighed. No one looked particularly pleased with this conclusion Harry had drawn, but their worry still stemmed from how he'd gotten to this situation rather than the bit of water he was fixing to jump into. Sirius was fighting off terrible visions of Inferi leaping into the water the moment he stepped foot in there. Remus managed an awkward laugh at the idea, though none of them had ever entertained the thought. Not something I wanted reminded of right now, James hissed, shifting uncomfortably. The feeling was eerie. He didn't even know if there was a battle to be preparing for, or this was a triumphant moment to be celebrating. Harry hadn't realized he was stuttering with remembered cold until his mother rubbed his arm in sympathy and James gave a wave of his wand to stoke the fire. All of them were shivering at the idea of what Harry was putting himself through. Needlessly, they were still half convinced. Made my la lake dive sea seem like a br breeze, Harry stuttered out. All four of them were tempted to take the book away from him. He looked more likely to bite his tongue off than admit he wasn't trying to play this off as usual. Harry still wouldn't let them, though, pushing away the burning cold of his memories and focusing on the print rather than the feeling. You didn't take the Horcrux off, Lily screeched. It hadn't even occurred to her this hadn't been mentioned in the pile of Harry's other things. Are you insane? James demanded, asking this with far more concern than he ever had to even Sirius. You know those things will fight back, even if they aren't as sentient as that diary had been. Why would you bring it down there into the water with you? Harry had to take a moment to even put the words spoken to him into a recognizable order, rubbing his hand across his throat, repeatedly now, as he chased away the cold stutter to be replaced with a pain he kept having to force himself to remember was no longer there. He could speak now if he chose, but it took even more effort. It wasn't ticking, and he couldn't fully answer. There was no real reason, other than the compulsion to keep it on him for so long to make sure it would not fall into any other hands had almost ended him. James really did try to take the book away from him, then in concern. He didn't want Harry to strangle himself over the words while being reminded of it happening to him, but Harry held on all the tighter. He could do this, he knew he could, and this whole ordeal would be worth it when he made his way out of the water. He could feel it. Lily quietly brushed at the tears stinging in her eyes. No matter how many times her son seemed to be on death's door, she'd never grow used to hearing it. Ron, Harry gasped, as if he were just now getting that first gulp of air back. You're joking, James insisted, but the delighted and just as surprised expression on Harry's face left no room otherwise. Well, I'll give him this, Remus began weakly. He came back with bloody good weight. How did he come back? He finished doing a double take in concern. There was no reason for someone to pretend to be Ron when Harry had already been in a vulnerable enough position, but these circumstances were still really bothering him. Who cares? Harry cheered. He looked elated, even that beyond words. The grim light behind his eyes, 10 times worse than it had even been back during their last fight in his 4th year, was finally gone again. He looked likely to get up any second and start dancing around with excitement. The thought had been plaguing him for hours now. What could have been another lifetime that he and Ron would never see each other again, would never again have the chance to make up from this horrid fight? They were still worried a lot, but they let Harry keep going with as light a tone as he had since he'd heard about the Gryffindor sword swap. At least Ron was likely to explain himself. What a comeback, Sirius finished, eyes narrowed shrewdly as if he still had the urge to finish that very differently. We noticed, James sniffed. So did Snape once. You didn't see me groveling to him with thanks, James grumbled. He genuinely understood Ron leaving enough his fury had never fully been ignited, but that didn't mean he was particularly thrilled he was back. How many times would Ron flip-flop back and forth during this mad quest? If he did that to his son again, he would not be so kind a second time. We actually haven't seen Ron's Patronus yet, Sirius agreed, half amused at the idea. Would a bloke have a female animal? James asked in surprise. I'm sure it's possible, Remus answered slowly. Given the person and the circumstances of when they produce the animal, but I can't see how any of this is lining up. Harry brushed past this impatiently, if anything because that question was sitting heavily on his mind, but the answer was as muddled as ever, and he didn't want anything to bog down this happy moment. James couldn't help a heavy snort of amusement. Okay, maybe he was happy to have Ron back, for now. Oh yes, I'm sure you would have swept it under the rug without a second thought any other night, Sirius snickered. I am curious, if he hadn't shown up in such a heroic fashion, how your real reception would have gone down, Lily agreed. Perhaps a bit more shouting, Harry conceded with nothing but cheer in his voice. He had no interests in thinking about what-ifs right now. He'd been dwelling on more than enough of those all evening. He had his best friend back now. They had the sword and could finally put this problem to rest. The only reason you're still standing, I'm sure, James shrugged, thinking Harry would have likely hit him under normal circumstances. Can't help but notice you didn't answer Ron. Remus winced on his behalf. Harry looked plenty jazzed in here at this turn of events, but he imagined he was much more on guard in the moment. He couldn't feel too bad for Ron, though. He could live with discomfort a little while longer for all he put Harry through. Ah! All four of them groaned at once. Now they were just as likely to pummel Ron for once again Harry never getting a straight answer in his life. At least I can praise Ron's priorities once more. Sirius smiled genuinely. That doesn't mean much of anything, Lily sighed. It had bloody better be. Remus huffed, as much trouble as it had caused. Harry's voice shook again. He played off the moment successfully, as remembering the feeling of it choking him. But there was some deeper understanding of the mechanics of this thing trying to light within him he had no wish to grasp. I think he'd want to. It certainly caused him the most grief, Sirius agreed, even if there was a flash of envy in him as much as the satisfactory flowing through. Finally, this remnant would be purged. Regulus would have a chance to be in peace, at least in that time. There had been a constant and ever-present throb in James' spine for 9 long days now, relating back to Dumbledore imparting that wisdom on his son when he'd been merciful to another, and the consequences of that action had echoed through the rest of Harry's life still. Then even farther back, to what Lily had unknowingly done for their child. Here at least was a moment James could look upon and smile at the unknown magic embedded into the fabrics of their life. Why do you need to open it at all? Sirius protested. Stabbing it while it's closed will destroy the locket just fine. It wouldn't have worked, Harry said with such authority. Sirius only considered questioning further for a few seconds before letting go. You always have dismissed that particular ability, Remus agreed, thinking back to their earlier comments about different ways this could be possible and glad to see Harry finally trying one of them. No, I am, Sirius muttered, while Harry couldn't help a quiet snicker. No, I am. Sirius inserted again without thinking. Of all things, Harry still looked around at him and laughed again. It had never felt like an excuse to them, not even Harry. He realized that blaming Ron for how he felt hearing this would be like blaming Ginny while she'd been possessed by the diary. These things always brought out the worst in people. He was just happy to have his best friend back now. Harry felt a funny little smile flash across him for a moment. Wasn't sure why, but he knew invoking Ron's name had been exactly the right thing to say at that moment. Remus couldn't help his face squishing up in disgust, now wondering abstractly if they were going to find his nose in Hufflepuff's cup or something. I don't know what it's on about. James tried to protest. It sounded flimsy, but he couldn't help saying it as if Ron were here to comfort. He can't be Quidditch captain anymore. That's still Harry's title. What were those other things in the mirror? Head boy, still a possibility if he goes to repeat his 7th year, Sirius agreed. They'd been aware from the very start all Ron had wanted was a bit of attention he didn't have to share. It wasn't something they'd ever been able to sympathize with as they got that whenever they asked. For that to follow him his whole life, though, constantly building to this moment, well, it wasn't hard to imagine this twisted bit of soul feeding off of this and making Ron's world worse every moment. There was only one moment inside of Harry in heart-stopping fear. He did not pause, though, not even at risk of his own life possibly being in danger from his best friend. It wasn't a question to him. There was again some lingering disappointment that this wasn't a more triumphant feeling. Of all the hell that particular one had put them all through, it was now being brushed aside in favor of Ron. A boy they'd never met, would have not a single attachment to really, except that Harry cared about him, so they did too. They wanted to comfort him, offer words of encouragement just like they would their own. For this boy roped into all of this, finally making the right choice when it came to overcoming his fears. Harry tried to take another breath of relief that was forever in his past now, but it wouldn't last, in fact caught in his throat again. As much as he loved those around him for going through all of this with him, there was still something missing. Ron and Hermione may still be lost to him forever, and he didn't know how to handle that. He grit his teeth and kept going loudly, but the ever-dwindling amount of chapters he had left wasn't going to let him brush this problem aside much longer. "I can offer a few choice words if you'd like," Sirius offered, well aware Harry wasn't the one stuttering over what to say. "I'm sure you could write your own book's worth of commentary over my life," Harry chuckled. "That sums up the last 40 minutes of events nicely," James agreed. "Give it a few more adventures. I'm sure it'll sink in." Remus offered, imagining Ron telling all of this to his family, though that wasn't likely to go much better than them hearing of it. I can," Lily muttered, thinking her reception likely wouldn't go half as well as Harry's, unless Ron somehow managed to save her from a burning tent next. "I don't know what you're thinking is going to happen, Harry, but staying out of it won't be good for any scenarios," James promised. Either they were going to have a spectacular welcome back, in which case Harry would need to loudly remind them of his presence, or Hermione's more violent streak could make an appearance, and Harry would likely jump in between the pair to save Ron's life. "The suspense is killing me," Sirius Stage whispered. "Ah, so, the Malfoy affect," Remus nodded agreement to this reaction. "I don't know, this may be slightly more minor," Lily shrugged. "She decked that ferret across the face once, now she's just kind of wailing on him. Bit unfair of her, really. It's not as if he could push her back." James flinched at the idea of punching a girl like some ruffian muggle. "Casting magic at each other is much more civil." "Let's hope she doesn't set another flock of birds on him," Sirius disagreed. "I'm glad you lot are enjoying the show so much," Harry muttered, flinching a bit at this rather vivid memory, even after everything else that had happened this night. "Yeah, I would too," Sirius said quickly. That girl could do any number of things with and without magic. James couldn't help a low whistle, still partly amused and now partly afraid for his son. "Can Hermione perform wandless magic now? I'm starting to feel Harry should have run from the tent instead." "Let them have a chance to explain," Lily offered, rather unsure herself. "I'm sure she'll, have a breather from this part to hear. I still want to know how he got back as well." She couldn't help a little fondness for Hermione's mood. She knew she'd go flying off the handle in the same situation. "The best thing you can do right now," Sirius promised. "It is what they do best," Remus agreed in a casual enough tone of voice. "Ouch, low blow," Sirius winced, as he'd never heard Hermione take a shot like that before. "Ron's not doing himself any favors, though," James sighed. He didn't know what Ron had been up to in the meantime, but whatever it was, he doubted was worse than the whole of Godric's Hollow. "Why would Snape show up now?" Remus asked politely, but Harry just looked confused for a moment and muttered to himself while Sirius and James snickered. Harry only had to glance up for a second to realize they knew no more than he did what snatchers were, and quickly went back now that Ron was giving an explanation. Lily wrapped her arms around herself and had to fight back her own panic attack at the reminder once again of the plight all those were going through, while Harry was struggling through these tasks. Harry gave an uneasy shiver for that remark, imagining an all-out war breaking out as the rest of the Weasleys tried to stop Ron from being publicly executed, while he and Hermione would have no idea. They all frowned in concern for that name popping back up. Honestly, he hadn't crossed their mind since Harry had accidentally outed himself during that fight. Now they were suddenly wondering if he'd been a casualty death due to Voldemort's displeasure during the after-effects of that fight. "I never got the impression she cared for Ron's particular sense of humor," Lily disagreed, even as she smiled slightly for his effort. Harry did feel his sympathy stirring with worry for that, and was thankfully distracted, if not more worried, by Remus asking, "Where exactly did he apparate to?" "I just assumed he went straight to the burrow, but that clearly wasn't the case now." "Maybe Diagon Alley," Lily offered. "He may have been trying to go to the twins' place first and got caught there." "At least he got out all right," Harry said in relief, heart gripping painfully at the idea of that happening to Ron, and he'd have never known. "Ron's really got a problem for that," Sirius muttered absently, remembering his first successful attempt as well. It was possible he'd just never fully get the hang of it. James swallowed painfully and Lily blanched. That hadn't even been the worst event to them. "She's really not giving him an inch," Lily sighed. She couldn't really blame her. Rather than disapparating, Ron could have just stormed off, up the bank, or even to where Dean and that group had just been. anything other than trying to get magically farther away and landing himself in this mess. The point was, though, he'd immediately tried to come back, which was even more than they'd originally thought of him. Apparently, he hadn't even made an attempt to get back in touch with his family before he realized his mistake that had to count for something when Hermione calmed down. Really? That would have caught my attention. James gave an uneasy laugh. Must have been craning her neck to do that, Sirius visualized, lips twitching. Considering how tall Ron was often described, and Hermione had already lowered herself to a chair to do this, it sounded funny out of context. Hush, Remus winced, keeping the majority of his reaction covered, as reminding them Remus still might want to be helping Harry more than anything else going on in his life right now wouldn't make anyone feel better. What's that got to do with anything? James asked, feeling like he'd missed something. Was there something inscribed on it too? Lily asked. Nope, Harry confirmed, flipping the page eagerly as he'd been wondering just as much, but had been more eager to take Ron back in the circle than demand answers. Hermione's natural state addressing anything, Lily agreed, feeling much the same as her, but unsure why Ron would lie about something like this. Harry rarely got the gratification of understanding a flash of memory so soon afterwards. Now he was practically beaming. If only he'd known this would have brought Ron back faster, they could have said it even before the Godric's hollow debacle. Wow, Remus demanded. Sure, he'd heard wrong, but Sirius waved him quiet so they could hear the full answer. The garden where? Had he been at the burrow? James muttered, as he'd now imagined Ron had just been wandering aimlessly around the countryside by himself. Harry merely shushed him, far more invested in this. That can't be natural. Remus insisted again, not caring Sirius shushed him again. This was getting stranger by the moment. This had never been a very simple device in their minds, what with the way it worked magic and electricity together. Now, though, even excusing it as something of Dumbledore's invention wasn't making a lick of sense. What magic was this? Harry was reading right through it without much of a care, but the others' minds were boggling at this stretch of magic they couldn't even conceive. That's a relief, Lily said quietly, as she'd still been half afraid it had been Voldemort hot on his trails this whole time after he'd come so close before. This thing is insane. James sounded as intrigued as he did incredulous. Would it just let him follow you around until he finally caught up with you? What's the limitations on this thing anyways? Could anyone have used it so long as one of you lot said someone's name around it? Afraid only Dumbledore would know, and we don't even know if he's invented it yet, Lily said in disappointment. I still wouldn't put money on that, Sirius disagreed. It's too much of a coincidence with Lily's connection to it, and doesn't at all explain why the person would lead Harry there, but keep itself hidden away. There must be some other magic going on with the sword. Instead of itself physically presenting to a Gryffindor in need, it somehow summoned something Harry would trust to lead it. That doesn't seem any more convoluted than the general magic, Lily slowly agreed. But then why now? What about what Harry and Hermione were doing that night would be any different than when they first discovered they needed it? They were already out of ideas on this thing, and they hadn't really much of one to begin with. Harry was even less convinced. Hermione had been right, he was sure, but he couldn't imagine how or why, as usual. It's always good to know Hermione's need for knowledge will trump her anger at someone, Remus grinned. Next time you piss her off, Harry, just dangle a puzzle in front of her face. I doubt it'll work the more times it's done, Harry grinned, actually gave a carefree, non-hindered smile for what felt like the first time all evening. Besides, I'd very quickly run out of puzzles. They laughed, though it wasn't really that funny. It was just such a simple blessing to see him feeling so happy again. James frowned at Harry, thinking he maybe should have just stepped out for that next part and let the two hash it out. It wouldn't do to let Ron's resentment build up all over again and have another blowout fight in 4 years. The lad really needed to finally air all his grievances. I didn't even register that part, Sirius sighed. Lucky of him, though. I doubt it'll feel any better than Hermione's, though. James winced, as Harry did have another small grimace for the reminder of wands, clutching his tightly again, but much more quickly moving on this time, a sense of hope finally back in his words. Maybe it is best to not share everything in the moment, Remus muttered, thinking Hermione wasn't going to want to share how that happened any more than Ron's real experience out there right now. 5 collective snorts of laughter once again rang in the room. Not forgotten that one bit. Harry laughed, a final carefree sound again as he closed the chapter. And the book. I'm sorry I forced you all awake so late, but don't think twice about it. James got out around a yawn. We can't blame you for needing to stay awake to find your friend coming back to you, Lily promised, brushing his cheek maternally as she passed, gazing at him a few moments longer as she wished the world of happiness for him and his friends, something the 4 of them would forever be denied. Chapter 20. Xenophilius Lovegood. Chapter text. Harry woke up with a sense of finality. This was it. Through hell or high water, they were going to finish with his story today. After 15 days of learning who he was and who he was meant to be, he would have to finally face the very real decision. What next? Though exhausted, he could not have slept long. He slowly got himself out of bed. A bed he'd slept in nearly every night since he'd been here. This may be the last time. He brushed his hand over the warm blanket, wondering what other lasts were in store for him. He stepped out onto the landing to find he was the only one awake. Lily's cat, Hickory, was sprawled out in the middle of the hallway, lamp-like eyes gazing at Harry as he stepped around him into his baby room. His diminutive form was so tiny. Harry reached down and placed nearly his whole hand on his smaller counterpart's back. He stayed like that for quite some time, mind traversing through every route that he could be on, both past and future for him. It wasn't as if he was afraid to be caught in here, but he still quietly slipped back out when he heard movement downstairs. When everyone was finally roused for breakfast and settled in for the first few moments, Harry realized the others felt it too. He wondered if he should bring it up himself as he spread marmalade on his toast, but there was still a happy contentment surrounding the air he didn't want to ruin. That had never stopped the marauders from speaking their mind. So, James began with forced calm once he'd slurped up a few bites of cereal. I've been thinking on how to check on that magical ward we're stuck in, and I think the best plan is one of us apparate to Hogsmeade with Harry. Whether it works or not, we'll be back and let you. Lily narrowed her eyes at him. It should be me or Remus. We haven't broken that magical boundary yet, and I still don't like the risk of what might happen if you do it twice. James bit his tongue to stop himself. They'd certainly tried at their own points, but that didn't matter now. He was rounding himself up for another side to his argument when Harry interrupted. I understand you lot wanting to get out of here as soon as possible, but shouldn't we discuss first, Wellmy? I don't want to get you guys into trouble for me being here. We'll have to work that in slowly, Sirius agreed. It'll take much more convincing of others than it did us. This is all to be believed, Remus sighed. Let's skip on having them read all the books next, though, Lily huffed. We don't need to spend another fortnight going through this mess, being interrupted every 5 seconds. The Order can live with just the highlight problems. Speaking of, James was quick to change the subject, pushing his half-eaten breakfast away quickly and slopping milk along the table. He hardly noticed his stomach had clenched so painfully. Let's get this over with. I'm sure Harry will be more relieved than any of us. This'll all wrap up today. Absolutely, Harry nodded along with more enthusiasm than he really felt. The only good thing that he could think of coming from this was no more headaches, because the only answer he had left to look forward to was how he'd wound up here. The mystery of the life he'd left behind seemed even more ambiguous than ever. That didn't stop him from paying close attention to Remus as they finally settled down and opened the book for the last time. Lily couldn't help but to start snickering in surprise. She could sympathize with that mood before she got together with her husband. Is Hermione the widow in this scenario? Sirius burst out laughing. Poor bloke's going to develop a multiple personality, James chuckled, but at least admired he was trying on all fronts. I'm sure that's all you needed to polish off the last of them, Remus muttered so no one else could hear. It's almost funny he and Hermione switched roles, Remus said aloud. Harry didn't seem to find that all too funny, muttering about how that's all they needed, another fight to break out. It was a good thing the Horcrux was destroyed. He didn't want to know how it would amplify Hermione's feelings over this next. The what? The 5 said in sync, which they actually hadn't done in quite some time, causing Remus to pause for just a moment and snicker before cueing them into this rather vital-sounding information. Is Ron still going to be on about that? James asked in exasperation before he blinked in surprise and put the two together. Bloody hell, what how? Remus shushed him so he could make sure they really knew what was going on. Well, it's a good thing it caught her attention, Lily said. She needs to hear this too. That's insane. Sirius spluttered, looking angrier than anything. How could they? That's impossible, Lily asked numbly. Really, it's no more difficult than honing in the use of magic around a muggle or underage wizard, which I'm confident is also being abused. Now you're just keying into a phrase, or rather one word, an even broader spectrum, so possibly even easier. That's so invasive, and Sirius still thundered, looking ready to throttle someone he was so angry. Intelligent, Remus finished bleakly, what Sirius was really thinking but unwilling to say. I hate to say it, but that's a bloody smart play. The ones who will pose a real threat to Voldemort, he even flinched for a second himself like he expected it to spontaneously happen in here, are the ones who say his name, James finished for him. Sirius took a deep breath to calm his nerves, eyes worriedly on Moony as he stated, well, damn them for getting smarter, I suppose, but at least it would only work once. Not necessarily, Harry shivered. Depending on how widely known this is, we certainly didn't figure it out. Because you had Ron being all obnoxious about it there for a time, Remus pacified both Harry and Sirius. I'm sure word of mouth, literally in this case, would clue in fast enough what was happening. Why wasn't it happening to us in Grimmauld Place? Harry rebutted. No Death Eaters could suddenly burst in there, and we said it all the time. I guess it doesn't break all enchantments, Sirius finally answered when he realized he was expected to. The place is still under the Fidelius charm, which must be even more powerful than the taboo. Though I'm sure that Yaxley bloke would still be able to get in there now every time you did along with anyone else he brought along, as if the place wasn't hospitable enough already. Harry shivered all the same, then managed a weak laugh at himself, or more, Ron's mood having unintentionally saved their life. Let's just hope they never get this idea ever again, Lily sighed. They'll never get this far again, James vowed. Of course I am, Sirius smirked, while Remus ignored him, but Harry still got a laugh. Serious amusement vanished at once for the idea he'd never actually gotten rid of, and James looked fearfully on at Remus, who indeed felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He hadn't made it a secret he wasn't afraid to save Voldemort, and his already unstable future had just been made more perilous if he'd been ambushed. Harry may not have ever even learned what that outcome was. He took a careful breath and kept reading in a steady voice anyways, refusing to let himself dwell on this any more than he'd let his friends. They didn't even know him, and they all yelped in worry. It was of no comfort this was already so close to being true. I thought his was a cat. Remus purposefully said wrong, just to distract them. It's a lynx Moony, Harry said so at the wedding. James was quick to correct, well aware what he was doing, but it did help all the same. What's with Ron's desire for all these dead people to come back to life? Lily shivered at the idea, in fairy swimming in her mind once more. Besides, wasn't it something bird-like? James asked of no one, the one-time Dumbledore having doing so that was specifically mentioned. I'd find it a tad more horrifying, Sirius disagreed. There was certainly at least one person he'd wish back from the dead now, if anything just to apologize, but from Harry's perspective he could see the desire. He deserved someone to be there for him far more than it actually happened. Why do you say that? Remus asked in surprise, thinking Harry had gotten a better look once, and it was never mentioned. I put it together afterwards. Had I never mentioned that? Harry shrugged off, the sudden implication of what Ron was suggesting seeming even more wistful now. He could hear the marauders around him laughing at the idea of their old headmaster somehow magically deciding he'd been an animagus and could actually be out there helping if this was the case. But Lily quickly reminded them to pay attention to reality rather than this gruesome fantasy. He's not wrong, Remus nodded slowly. Kingsley could have fallen in love during this time, and it may have possibly changed. Great, so it went from being able to exclude a handful of people to it back to being anyone in the world, Sirius groaned. I think we can still rule out Arthur, James offered. They were all joking. Lily was sure as she shivered once more for the reminder. Was it really just a coincidence this particular patroness meant so much to Harry? This still didn't explain why the caster wouldn't just reveal themselves, if indeed it had been a patroness at all. Do, please share, Remus sighed, as they couldn't come up with much of a better explanation in all of this. Harry hated feeling his mood plummet again so soon. It's not as if he'd forgotten, but he'd been so elated at his return, he tried his best to look past the whole thing. The very idea Dumbledore had not only predicted this, though made it all seem worse. Just another thing he should have been told about long before it happened. Harry chuckled at himself, glad to know he'd managed to stay focused on the right thing to his friend. Was that the most interesting thing in that book? Lily asked. It was said to be pretty big. I expected a few more nasty revelations. That was a chapter near the middle, too. Surely she ended on something more dramatic, like he was living in the closet. Sirius exclaimed with an eye roll. See, he and Hermione can still get along. James snickered at Harry's put-out look for this still being brought up in defense. I hope Ron doesn't stop arguing with you two again, Remus frowned. I get he's keeping himself in check for now, but it could really just cause more problems if he never lets himself act normally again. I'm sure he'll get over it soon enough, Harry chuckled, admittedly missing that side of Ron after a few days as well. Interesting, Sirius offered. I am rather thorny when— Oh no, you don't. Remus tried to psychically close his mouth. You're not going to make that bloody joke. It's a type of wood padfoot. I certainly can be, Sirius leered. The two were so distracted bickering, Sirius actually missed Lily smothering more laughter at the two idiots, and James was quick to hurry along Remus when he noticed to save them another hour of serious gloating he'd almost made Lily laugh. Imagine Ron and Neville living with that through part of their school life, James sighed. Results are always a bit shoddy when you're using a wand that didn't choose you. Really? Sirius asked in surprise. I can't imagine how you'd forget. I honestly thought you were doing two things at once, Remus agreed. Why would you call my wand thorny? Sirius asked innocently, and Harry did laugh that time in more surprise. Remus' voice choked over that description, breath seizing in his throat as a silver hand flashed across his mind for a dreaded second before he roughly moved on. Easy for her to say. She's never lacked confidence when it comes to her magic, Lily sighed, watching Harry again hold his wand closely to him as he once again tried to understand what had happened. Sirius opened his mouth yet again, and this time James tried to swoop in. Why would you care to make a joke about your last name anyways? Weren't you going to switch it to mine? Sirius contemplated this for a moment, relishing yet another wave of humor he could bless upon them all versus, indeed being reminded frequently of a last name he wasn't particularly proud of, before nodding his assent to the later. All right, Prongs, you get this round. I very seriously thank you. He left himself open in gratitude, and Sirius more than happily swooped in. Why would I thank you, Prongs? Harry once again laughed, a noise they'd been missing for quite some time. There's just no pleasing everyone, Sirius chuckled. Please don't tell me Ron picked up his mother's taste in music while he was gone, Remus sighed. Sounds promising, James said, eyes lighting with pure excitement. This could be exactly what Harry needed to get a boost on more information, which was really what the three were still lacking in their hunt. Irony at its purest, Lily snorted, confident the girl had spent the weeks dreaming otherwise. Sirius sighed, but kept himself in check and didn't do so again. Remus almost felt odd continuing without the interruption. Rude, Sirius sniffed. He'd know we've tried ignoring him, James confessed. It had disastrous endings when it goes on too long. Sirius was clearly unrepentant, and Harry laughed harder than ever. Just what we need to brighten the mood more, Lily said with a nasty sneer. Most likely, Remus huffed, just as there were chapters covering every mundane thing he'd ever done which would be twisted beyond recognition. There was probably a passage in there about some ulterior motive of employing him, Hagrid, and Moody at the school again. Remus paused for a second and double-checked he'd read that right. I mean, James scratched at the back of his neck in confusion. I'm sure he's an interesting enough bloke, but that's a bit. He trailed off without needing to finish. None of them had exactly forgotten about it, but they had no idea why Hermione thought this was a link. Sirius wasn't joking all that much when he asked, is it possible, in the absence of a library, the girl's driven herself a bit nuts in asking the guy who's, well, a bit nuts? Harry couldn't really be mad. He'd been wondering the same thing in the moment. It's never a pleasant reminder she does occasionally have facts to back up her fiction, Lily sighed. That's adorable, James snorted. Why didn't we ever do that for the M in our name? Sirius began to pout, before he went cross-eyed in remembering he didn't have an M in his name, and muttered about how cruel the world was. So, He just stole the mark rather than inventing his own, James snorted in disgust. I can see why he needed Dumbledore's help with whatever was going on. The same man who once published as fact Sirius was a secret rock star and Scrimgeour was a vampire. Remus confirmed Hermione's train of logic in hopes it would crash before it went any farther. We never did confirm those to not be real, Sirius retorted lightly, looking more amused than anything. They'd kept saying Harry needed more lightheartedness in his life. This was the perfect way to get some. At this rate, anything will be better than that place, James muttered. He didn't care if Xenophilius turned out to be a Death Eater in disguise. That was still easier to grasp than visualizing Harry kneeling over their graves. He sort of did in the past, Lily hedged as she too tried to understand why this did keep coming up. Like your trials to get to the Philosopher's Stone, I never believed those were just coincidence. They felt more like tests, and well, here's round two. I liked catching the key better, Harry huffed. A little too useful, Remus grumbled, still having issues wrapping his mind around how that thing worked. Reverse portkey. Had Dumbledore captured the essence of the Mirror of Erist? The possibilities were endless and melted his brain just thinking about. After all these years, Ron still got that brown spot on his nose, Sirius snorted. I can't blame him for wanting to get back on her good side, though, James chuckled. You've been asking yourself that from the beginning, love, Lily sighed. We still don't know the answer to it. Harry chewed on his lip without answering. The burning feeling around that question still hadn't left. This isn't homework, Remus half shouted. A straight answer won't be the death of him, I promise. I think that's the best description Ron's ever got, Sirius burst out laughing, causing them all to laugh even harder. Remus had to stop now, he was snickering so hard, and it took several seconds before he could keep going intelligibly. They'd really missed having Ron around this Ron. I imagine Hermione is as well and just hiding it better, Lily promised. He might even be able to unintentionally pass on some information about those, Sirius offered hopefully. Like maybe places the Death Eaters have been fortifying. Do you think he'd want to draw attention to them like that? James asked in surprise. I doubt they'd know what they were guarding. He wouldn't tell them why they were really there, Remus shrugged. Don't they live over by Ron's place? Sirius thought back, feeling like that had been mentioned before. You haven't seen the hills around his place. Harry gave a little shake to his head. That won't narrow it down much. I accept that, James smirked, throwing a loving look at his wife. And that's true, Lily sighed indulgently. Harry felt much the same. It had been odd to look back and realize he hadn't a chance to visit during his 5th year. Grimmauld Place could never feel like the Burrow, no matter how many Weasleys were there, not with the haunted memory of his godfather always lurking. What? They muttered in confusion, as he had mentioned talking to Bill at least. Surely he wasn't sleeping in the garden with nobody knowing. He makes a good point, James snorted. I'm now realizing I should have been more suspicious when he didn't come back in pieces. Oh, was the mutual understanding, and small surprise this brought. Remus paused with a small bit of admiration for this. Ron really had grown in his weeks apart, or at least became more focused on the task at hand, rather than even suggesting they quietly check in to see all was well. Then again, maybe he knew if he had he couldn't leave again, half the reason because of Marley. A little presumptuous, Sirius held up his thumb and forefinger close together to prove his point. I believe it, Remus chuckled. Not the best piece in the game, but a direct one, I like it. Lily giggled as she fidgeted with a bit of hair. Actually, that was my first thought too, James conceded as Lily laughed further. I'm sure I'd love to if I knew what that was, Sirius muttered. Please tell me those are the dirigible plums, James chuckled. I want a pair for my lily flower. Lily made a face at him that spoke volumes of what she thought of that, but his smile remained unrepentant. And no one brought a basket to pick it. Remus sighed in disappointment. I'll bet you anything you like that Owl has the most interesting name ever, Sirius declared. That's a hefty bet, and I still don't want to take it, James acknowledged. Either he's proud of Luna's schoolhouse, or that has some other interesting meaning to it as well, Lily chuckled, already enjoying this place more than any other Harry had visited. At least it felt like someone's home. Most people are, James conceded. It's one of the only times I ever saw Moony wearing clothes that didn't have a patch on them, not a string out of place, I tell you. I was so flattered. Sirius made me, he said tragically. Threatened to rip off something else if I got them messed up before the wedding. Harry was about to hurt a lung, he was laughing so hard. That's talent, James snorted. At some point, I don't know why you still bother introducing yourself, Sirius snorted. Got to keep reminding himself of who he is, Remus said fondly. Because I really missed that happening, Harry sighed. No matter how many times it happened in his life, he knew he'd never grow quite used to it. Oh, so he's one of those, Lily muttered in disgust. Will write all the papers about an adventure and helping those who deserve it like Harry, but couldn't walk out the front door to do his part. Remus looked puzzled at this, though. Didn't he and Luna go on holiday all the time searching for new beasts? This was a far cry from a man having to do something relatively dangerous, shaking over letting someone in his front door. I guess not everyone can greet you with open arms, James agreed sadly. The others were smiling and looking rather amused at all this, Sirius even loudly saying he'd love a visit, but Harry was starting to get a bad feeling about this. It was hard to place why. He felt no real ill will towards Luna's dad, but something he couldn't shake nonetheless. With that girl, there is no telling, James chuckled. A place I'd still love to explore, Sirius laughed, while Harry's hand crept to his forehead and he began rubbing at his temple in further pain. Now there was no denying it. There was a stirring in his memories he'd swear he should be paying attention to, but even trying for a second nearly made him vomit from the pain. I hope you get a free sample, Remus snickered. Hermione really needs some new reading material. I'm sure there are at least a dozen things in there worth her noticing. Lily nodded without surprise. For all of his radical ideas, he was sure to have plenty of other more grounded things Hermione would find fascinating. Remus blinked in surprise at the small description, a few things coming to mind what that could have been from, at least one of which he wouldn't like Harry and his friends around. Oh, did he actually find proof of it? Remus looked genuinely excited for such a thing happening in the midst of all these horrible goings-on. Must she? James sighed for the attitude. Oh, shit. Sirius was so surprised he nearly startled right out of his seat, his mind flashing back to a particularly detailed description of what had happened to the first man to discover the properties of that thing. Remus blanched in shock and had to fight very hard not to do the same. Okay, I take it back. This man has officially crossed into lunacy territory. How would he not recognize such a thing? James demanded. One didn't even need to be that well-versed in magical creatures to identify such a distinct object, and this man had claimed to do whole studies over them while looking for his other creatures. And it's in the house with Luna. Lily said furiously, remembering the girl sharing her mother had died due to an experimental accident. She'd have really thought the father would be a bit more careful. Harry shifted anxiously that now not only were they all in a bad mood for this being around, but his feeling this was all going to go wrong grew even worse by the minute. The only thing he had left to hope for was when it inevitably exploded in his face. No one else got hurt. Since when does Ron ever question her on stuff like this? Remus sighed, wishing the grooves had been mentioned in more detail so he could have understood the same. I wonder how often the idiot gets taken advantage of like that. Sirius scowled. I'm even more surprised if she didn't recognize what it was, Lily frowned. Surely they both wouldn't have made the same mistake. But Luna's followed her dad's teachings. Why wouldn't she believe him now? James said uneasily. James made yet another scathing noise of disgust, while Remus muttered how nice it really was to have run around again to speak theirs like that. I've been wondering about that, Lily agreed. You'd think she'd have heard the noise and come out to say hello. She never seemed particularly shy. I doubt it's possible she stayed at the castle at a time like this for the holiday, James agreed. She might actually be at the Burrow, Remus offered, thinking she and Ginny likely did this all the time as good of friends as they so often were mentioned. For what? Sirius muttered, unsure himself why they were getting more uneasy about this the longer it lasted. Harry shifting uncomfortably in his seat every few moments now wasn't helping. What are those? Lily asked in surprise, not missing the astounded looks on the boys' faces. Fish with webbed feet, Sirius began with an even more bewildered expression than her. But they live in deep lakes, not streams, James muttered with his head cocked to the side. And she's apparently doing this in the dead of winter, Remus demanded with a completely straight face. Lily fidgeted uneasily, but none of them could explain this growing paranoia properly. What reason would he have to lie? I'd imagine so, Harry said softly. a tight feeling squeezing inside him he didn't understand. My affection for this kid rises, Sirius agreed, having long since deciding he liked her at least as much as Hermione and wishing she'd be around more. I don't see why that's causing him to act like an even weirder git than is needed, James huffed. The guy was just piling suspicions upon himself for no reason if that was the case, as he already had that trouble on his back for printing the truth. Miracles happen. Lily giggled, grateful those two were back on some level ground. He may have started a fight with Fleur instead, though, as you should never upstage the bride, Remus chuckled. I don't get it, Remus finally said. Sirius just shrugged, as if they were supposed to understand what this bloke got up to any better. I think I'd take a pass, Lily muttered, usually all for creating concoctions to see what would happen, but not at this particular time. I'm surprised she didn't come sprinting up to the house with him, Sirius chuckled. We already knew she could be very focused on what she was doing, James shrugged. The what? All five of them asked in unison again. James burst out laughing louder than ever, finding it unsurprising that would happen most frequently around a place like that, but this time Harry did not join in. HP, I don't hate this MacGuffin of the book, but it's probably the weakest of all seven. The other six all introduced theirs by chapter 13 at the latest. This waited until 20. Over half the book. Admittedly, its saving grace is one of the three items has been present since the very first book, keeping the intrigue alive. But then Harry only spends one chapter obsessing over them before he gets over it, and the plot continues. He later has to make a Horcrux versus Hallows decision, but is it much of a challenge, really, when you couldn't bother to make any of the rest of the book about that? I'm sorry it seems I keep going on and gripping about stuff in particular this book, but from chapters 1622 just really feels like it could have been handled better. It's a huge chunk of the book I honestly wish I could skip, and that's not a good thing. Remember this sentence next chapter. Chapter 21, The Tale of the Three Brothers. Chapter text. Harry, what's the matter? Lily asked as she took the book from Remus. I thought you'd be more excited to finally be getting a straight answer from someone, even this oddball, Sirius concluded. Imagine if you just asked back at the wedding, James sighed. I hate it when stuff like that just slips under our notice. How are we supposed to know this would matter? Remus shrugged. Harry still didn't answer. He looked very troubled as he fought with his mind to understand why this felt so important. Lily exchanged an uneasy look with the others before deciding to start again, very displeased to see Ron's return hadn't kept him at peace as long as they would have hoped. It's part ignorance, part another perspective. Sirius rolled his eyes. Just because he thinks it means one thing doesn't mean everyone has to think so. If everyone would understand that, we'd be able to bottle world peace, James sighed. Ugh, Lily crinkled up her nose practically before she'd finished. I don't see how sugar would help much with that, Remus muttered. Perhaps it's an acquired taste. Sirius snickered. Please don't, James pleaded. I don't need Lily thinking you mean it and trying to improve on the recipe. Lily scowled at him while faintly blushing. She'd refrained from practicing any new ones while Harry was here, but couldn't deny it would be interesting. At least Sirius always made for a good test subject on that. He was always willing to try anything once. There really is a taste out there for everyone, Remus muttered, now genuinely wondering if he slipped the man said bean if he'd even notice. That old kid's story, James demanded, now convinced Lily was pulling his leg. All the research Dumbledore did at the end of that book, and he didn't bother mentioning these things by this name. Remus asked in surprise. I guess it's so obscure even Dumbledore never made the connection, Sirius began before quickly correcting himself. But he drew the bloody symbol that led you there, so I can't imagine why he wouldn't have this in his notes. All that when he was a teenager, though, Lily reminded. Maybe he does want you to look into Grindelwald now, instead of the design they used when they were younger. What would Grindelwald have to do with Horcruxes? Harry demanded of nothing, and why wouldn't he just say so? He finished even more frustrated at having to near constantly ask that question. Lily didn't have an answer for him on this, or anything so wearily went on. We're not really going to read through this again, are we? Remus sighed. No, I'll just skip, Lily promised, but chuckled a bit and instead read the next few lines aloud anyways, knowing it would amuse them just as much. The boys did indeed get a giggle for the exchange before Lily skimmed through the lot silently and quickly, with only one interruption from Harry in the middle that amused her. "You didn't seem surprised about death talking when we read it," she told him when she was done. "We just got done reading 4 other kids' tales," Harry shrugged. "I was long past asking why rabbits were babbity and a fountain could cure anything." Remus agreed that was fair, and went on even more amused than her. "Now I'm wishing Ron had been here the whole time just for what he would have said to half of this. Can't we please just hear of Hermione reading the rest of those stories to you two just for that?" Harry rolled his eyes at them, while Lily giggled as she found her place and read on. "Did I miss something?" Sirius asked. The things Death gave the brothers, I assume," Remus shrugged. "So, he's basically just going with the childish idea that they're all real, and owning one will make you master of death," Lily recalled Dumbledore's notes. He never called them Deathly Hallows, but the rest of that had been in there. "I still don't think it's completely out there," Sirius defended. "Prong's cloak and the Philosopher's Stone are proof enough there's magic beyond our understanding out there. Who's to say all 3 aren't as well?" "It's not impossible," Lily agreed, "but I don't at all understand why Dumbledore's left this to Hermione for. It must not be these things, but something more to do with Grindelwald. Dumbledore couldn't have predicted that book coming out, and Harry learning that, though," James protested. "He'd have no way of Harry realizing that connection. And I would this one. You think this is all another useless thing we misunderstood?" Harry sighed, not at all convinced of this himself. Well, not in those words, but yes," James finally admitted. "I can't see how any of this has to do with Voldemort and the Horcruxes." Harry clasped his wand tight in his hand again as he tried to understand. When he'd heard this story 4 days ago, he'd felt within him an importance he could never have understood until this moment. Now he knew why it had all felt so familiar, and still knew he was missing something significant in it all. It was frustrating beyond words. "This man would make a horrible teacher," Remus grumbled. "I agree with Mooney," Sirius huffed. "He's a right idiot making shit up to feel smarter about himself. I feel bad for Luna having to live with him." "Imagine if he'd met Lockhart, the two would get on," James snorted. Lily clucked her tongue but ignored the lot of them. "Sure taking her a long time," Lily muttered uneasily, shifting restlessly more and more as this went on. "I doubt she was doing a very good job," Remus snickered. Surely Harry didn't need to be one of her best friends to pick up on it. "We got something before Hermione for once." James snorted. "I doubt those are the exact words Luna used." Lily shook her head. Luna and Hermione didn't come across as the closest of friends, but the two's animosity had certainly trickled off as time went by. "I thought Ron was trying to get back in her good graces." Sirius snickered. "He's doing a terrible job of it." James opened and closed his mouth, looking highly amused now. "Well, when he puts it like that, it does seem uncanny mine's the only one like that. I don't think that's enough to prove the other 2 exist, though," Lily shrugged, which James didn't disagree with. "Technically, no one's seen such a thing, even those who use it," Sirius smirked, mimicking the obnoxious tone of Xenophilius. "Am I?" Harry asked, slightly amused. "No, it can be measured quite easily," James snickered. "The goblins do it on a semi-frequent basis." Sirius snorted enthusiastically now. "Well, he's got us there." "You're enjoying this too much," Remus scolded. "Harry's clearly on the wrong track with this idiot and needs to get out of there." "Try to relax, would you, Mooney?" James sighed. "I say they spend the night, catch up with Luna so we can find out more about Hogwarts. It wouldn't be awful for Harry to be in a home for the first time in months." Harry fidgeted uneasily for that suggestion, no matter how much he hoped that to be true. "I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he does," Lily agreed. "Why do I feel like that was mentioned somewhere in History of Magic?" Sirius muttered. "You're probably getting the names confused with Ogbard the Odious or whatever. They all start to blend together after a while," Remus sighed. It wasn't at all unusual for Harry to not have a clue why he got strange, sporadic gut feelings over random things, but this was unbelievable. He shook his head and wished it would make more sense. The name tugged at something in James' memories, an old family tree he'd once learned about from his father, but he'd paid even less attention to his than Sirius ever had. Still, he gave an amused sort of smile at Harry for something so far back up their line being brought up twice, and at least this time it wasn't surrounded by graves. "Yeah, because no one could go around and doodle that on there, like this insane buffoon would. Sirius rolled his eyes. Well, in his defense, this is the reason so many people in my line think the cloak has a curse on it, James offered, as he dredged up an old childhood conversation with his dad. Try to do something you shouldn't with it, like learn to replicate it. Bad things happen. Like being the master of death, Remus chuckled. I think that title would be a good thing, Sirius protested. Are you really saying we're descendants? Harry demanded in surprise, a warning gong ringing in his head. James waved his hand about. You'd have to really dig to trace it, and even then it's questionable at best. Name is one of the reasons the Potters still claim a pureblood line without being one of the originals, and no one really pushes back. I'm jealous, Sirius promised. That was much more cool than his bloody line. Harry bit down hard on his lip rather than further increasing his headache. They were so close to understanding all he could. Well, we know who the favorite child was, Sirius snickered. Only one of those is a normal name. I don't know what you're talking about, Sirius. Remus rolled his eyes. What? Cadmus was a Greek king. He created Thebes. Antioch is just a city, and I don't even know where they pulled Ignatus from. Sirius said, unrepentant. It's not an awful name, really, he finished contemplatively. Please never let this man have children, Lily muttered while pinching her nose for a moment at all the horrors and then reading loudly on. He's been doing that this whole time, James huffed. Is he waiting for the stars to come out and connect that to this story next? Where's Luna? Lily agreed. This really had been dragging on so long she was starting to get worried the girl had fallen in the river or something. Lily and Sirius were the only ones who even looked vaguely interested, Sirius more so for the experience than the actual meal. All five of them got a laugh out of that. I don't know. James finally looked at least slightly convinced otherwise. It tied back to him just a little too easily, things Xenophilius really couldn't have just made up, but would have taken dedicated research. He shouldn't know anything about if he didn't know where to start with the current owner of the cloak. I agree there's something there. Not some secret quest from Dumbledore, though, Lily said quickly, looking at her husband as if concerned for his health for this sudden switch. Honestly, James, Harry's already supposed to be out looking for Horcruxes, not these. Well, yes, he said slowly, but I think Hermione was right in the first place of coming here. It does keep popping up, and you can't deny it's eerily been getting some draws to my side of the family. But, he finally concluded to all of them watching him in bewilderment, maybe this was something Dumbledore would have meant for Harry to find out, long after the Horcruxes were dealt with. Sirius cleared his throat and put on a fair impression of their old headmaster. Well, Harry, we've finally defeated Voldemort and all his evil doings, but it only took a week, the two of us working together on that little problem. Now, here's another quest we shall partake in. He finished with a dubious look. I'm not hearing you come up with any better options, Remus shrugged. Harry looked torn between them all, an uneasy swirling feeling deep within him that told of something ahead he could never grasp in time. Instead, he just asked his mum to keep going. He was quite sick of that feeling and eager to be rid of it once and for all. You did, Lily noticed. He made some good points, Harry said quietly, his desire of not wishing to think on this now even more odd to them. Lily gave him a sympathetic smile but let him have his peace. So be boring, Sirius huffed. Honestly, parents are the worst thing ever. Gee, thanks, Pads, James theatrically pouted. Don't worry, Prongs. You're the exception, Sirius said cheerfully. Remus flinched. He hadn't at all forgotten his impending addition to that list, and how long it had gone without Harry even thinking about it. He certainly had been, but without anything new to go on, he'd been keeping himself put together in the face of the child's fate. Lily thankfully distracted everyone by scowling at Sirius, so no one had to think twice about what Remus did. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing, Evans, he said politely. Potter, all three corrected this time while sharing a grin. Sirius' smirk only widened when Lily kept going, and Harry was almost relaxed again at the easy distraction. I still hate those stupid sayings, Sirius muttered. Just because yours is so true, Remus smirked. Sirius ignored him, muttering about idiots and their special cypress wood. So was mine, James said fondly. It's a habit I expect Lily to fall into any day now. Lily swatted at him and muttered about idiots as well. See, nothing is without a good side. Remus chuckled. Ah, the perfect trio. James burst out laughing. Hermione's really more practical than even I've ever given her credit for, Sirius shook his head in exasperation, while Harry just looked amused and slightly sad no one was questioning him. It's clearly not so unbeatable, the way it's supposedly been passed around through the centuries, Remus snorted and reminded, causing Sirius to grumble some more about semantics. As if you don't do that enough yourself, Lily sighed. Agreed, having that thing would be like dragging an extra signal around to come attack you. James shook his head, but still couldn't say with any emphasis. He wouldn't deny himself he fancied the idea. I don't believe it, Sirius said at once. Managed to keep plenty under wraps, James said wistfully. Being illegal animagus, and having a werewolf mate aren't the same, and you know it prongs, Sirius shrugged without remorse. All lies begin with a truth, Lily agreed. Something they all missed hearing about wholeheartedly. It almost erased the unease of this place in that moment. Except for girls, apparently, they don't care about such things, James recalled with another amused snicker, taking the smack to the shoulder Lily gave him without regret. Those around him started laughing hard at his sheepish expression, but once the surprise and amusement had subsided, James looked even more curious for the idea than Harry. It's not the most fantastical idea in the world. It would absolutely explain those gold flames that came out of his wand. But it's clearly beatable, Harry sighed. You've got it back, though. James eyed the wand, more curiosity burning in him than he wanted to show. Are you just going to fantasize about Harry magically coming into all of them by luck now? Lily giggled at her husband. Maybe, he smirked. Was it so awful for his son? So that he'd be safe from not only Voldemort, but anyone who ever dared wish to harm him. What if Harry did find the resurrection stone, and somehow uniting all three had mended the wand? James did look a bit flummoxed at the reminder Ollivander had specially made it, but that could be argued, if the man had simply had to put a new wood around an old core. But then, if you stripped away even one of its properties, would it still be the same unbeatable wand? Isn't that obvious? Lily whispered the answer to no one. James had not felt that old flash of envy since Sirius' slated death. It had all but vanished, as he too mourned the loss of his beast friend in Harry's life. He was slightly surprised, but pleased with himself. It seemed gone permanently, even as his son once again thought of his godfather first. He couldn't blame him. He'd bring Sirius back before him too. Lily shivered down to her soul, fighting back a moan of pain. Nonsense, she wanted to protest at once. Of course she'd return for her son in a heartbeat like they all would. But it did not stop the truth of their world. They could never truly come back. Sirius made a watery sort of noise that was supposed to be a snort of mirth, muttering happily. That's how all of Remus' cooking attempts came out. Why do you know what that smells like, Padfoot? Remus challenged. Been practicing yourself much? The two were just a little too melancholy at the moment to continue, though. If only you had ever caught on to those silent spells, James chuckled. Swallow a bit to be polite, then Evanesco the rest. How much practice do you have with that? Lily asked suspiciously, which he judiciously declined answering. Sadly, as she was the one with the book, she fully realized this and turned back slowly with mutters at her husband. I'm sensing another circular argument that could go on for some time, Remus sighed. That still has nothing to do with those Horcruxes, Lily agreed. Give them a break, they deserve it, Sirius shrugged. The poor kids deserve to have something distracting happening to them after all they'd been through. Ha! James muttered. Does he have a mirror on the ceiling? Is someone in there an even bigger fan than Ginny once was? Remus asked, very amused by this now. I'm sure he wouldn't mind that much, actually, Sirius shrugged. Curiosity and all that, the man's clearly full of it. I'm sure you use that excuse to go looking through anything you like. Lily rolled her eyes, which he didn't bother denying. Harry felt a great rush of affection for Luna, and was pleased to see everyone around him did as well, if not a bit more saddened than his Lily, especially almost painfully recognized how lonely Luna must have been for so long. There was an awkward moment of silence that seemed to grow weight the longer Lily sat there, gaping down at that. Back straight and defensive, mind flickering to explanations more feeble than the last to explain this. Maybe she did stay at school. They're not even allowed, James began. Xenophilius said she was there, Sirius reminded in near hysterics. Maybe. Lily had nothing. There was no reason to lie when Harry already went there trusting him. Now that was broken beyond repair. They only gave themselves a second to stare at each other in pure fear before Lily scrambled madly to find her place, and get her boy out of this. Lily paused, just for a second, wishing more than anything for an explanation that wasn't staring them in the face of yet more betrayal in Harry's life. James had the mad desire to laugh, to scoff at this man, and coach him on how to keep up a lie, but his every waking thought was to get Harry and his friends out of there as fast as magically possible. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Sensation had been prevalent since before Harry had even entered, but they'd all convinced themselves they were imagining such a thing about a man Harry had no reason to distrust. Now they were each fighting off the urge to draw their own wand in defense as Harry escaped, none particularly keen on hearing whatever flimsy excuse this coward came up with. Sirius did laugh at that, a vicious edge to the noise, as he recalled all the times his pup had managed that on so many supposedly more experienced others. Remus made a nervous giggle as he imagined the fight erupting now because of something that probably happened around that house at all times. That blasted magazine, one of the things that had drawn Harry there in the first place. There was a dull thunk of understanding inside of Lily as she realized they'd gotten to him. I was on the verge of her consciousness, but she nearly wept as she kept going, not even wanting to understand. She froze up anyways, nearly in tears now as she realized what had been done. She couldn't stop, though, even as her voice shook with genuine understanding for what the man was going through. No part of her would claim to do the same to another child to save her own. James was nearly doubled over in pain from the internal struggle before him. He'd do anything to help that father reunite. But now Harry was the one having to pay the price for it all again, and he'd rather blast Xenophilius to wherever it was Crumple Snorkax were found, so he could be eaten by one. The worst part is, if he just told them the truth, they would have forgotten all about that stupid symbol that meant nothing, and they would have helped him. Remus snarled in disgust. Lily's heart might as well have fallen right out at the reminder she had not needed, the vivid image only worsening for them all as she said this almost calmly, with a steady mix of determination to right all these wrongs. Sirius winced in particular for that, fruitlessly checking Harry to see if he'd come out of such an ordeal with all limbs intact. James could vividly picture that, and couldn't get one drop of vicious pleasure from imagining him hitting every step on the way down. He was painfully aware what awaited him at the bottom, another father who couldn't save his child. James fought back the urge to cover his ears to stop himself screaming at Lily he didn't need to hear more. He wanted to hate Xenophilius as much as he did every other blighter who'd sold out his son for their own selfish gain. But he just couldn't this time, and he could find no middle ground in him for it. Lily only had a vague recollection of this name being used, as one Umbridge had claimed relation to while wearing the locket. The only blessing she could take from that was at least she hadn't been one to show up now. Hostages would never work the other way around, Sirius said darkly. Those scum wouldn't trade a bag of gold to get a Death Eater back when they can so easily replace them. Lily was nearly sick at the thought, because there was no doubt they would do it. All of those kids back at Hogwarts being held prisoner there under this same threat to every family, it nearly made her black out in indescribable rage. What the bloody hell kind of question is that? Sirius muttered impatiently. No matter how much the girl frustrated him at times, he still knew he'd react without question to a plan from someone he trusted, even if he doubted she could ever do the same. Now's not the time to be thinking of a public émir. James began to huff in confusion before what he was saying caught up with him, and he nodded to himself while quickly waving Lily on. Lily didn't either, as she tapped her nails impatiently on the cover of the book, images swimming in her mind of Harry having to yet again fight his way to be free and still somehow at the last second, it all going wrong. "Oh," was the soft whisper of understanding from Harry alone as Lily breathlessly finished, knowing she could understand later and get her boy out of there now. "That seems to be Hermione's specialty lately," Remus said in relief as Lily collapsed in her seat, letting the book dangle limply from her hands and wondering how many more heart failures she could take. HPHPHPHPHPHPHP asterisk, if you want to read their actual commentary on this. I do have them reading the Tales of Beedle the Bard on my profile, and decided not to rehash. A continuity error I didn't have a chance to point out in fic during the high-stakes action. But in the last chapter at the door, Harry passed Hermione the cloak to put in her bag. But here Harry apparently had it on him the whole time.